This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's a funny one, isn't it? I'm preparing to talk about the police this morning and almost overlooking the fact that they're currently being firebombed in Ballymena. It's not just people who were born elsewhere who are being attacked by racist thugs in Northern Ireland at the moment. That violence, as we feared yesterday, spreading. It's always targeted at the police as well, isn't it? The same happened during the Farage riots, didn't it? I don't know why we always overlook this, as generally a right-wing position, isn't it, to be very strong on law and order. And yet when right-wing racists take to the streets of our country, it's very often the police that are in the firing line. They can't win, can they? And listen, don't waste 10pence reminding me, because I will point it out myself, that the police themselves are often found to have been pretty hideous in their approach to various issues, most obviously institutional racism, misogyny and sexism. But that's not the reason why there is a parlous air around our police. I don't know when it started. I'm also conscious of my age. I'm increasingly conscious of my age because I've reached a point now where I have to make noises involuntarily whenever I move. If I find myself getting up from a chair, I have to go, ooh, like that. Or if I sit down, I have to go, ah. Well, is there an official age at which that starts? Is it like, do you get given a little license, like making weird noise license, when you know, like younger listeners are thinking, yeah, that's my dad, or that's my grandma. Listeners of a certain age are thinking, yeah, that's me. I don't know. Do we all start? Is it 51, 49? Do we all start at the same age, making odd noises when we're doing things that we never used to make noises, we never used to accompany with noises? So anyway, I think about my age a lot, and I wonder whether or not 'twas ever thus. You find, particularly if you listen to a programme like this one, or God forbid have to present it, you find yourself thinking about things in a way that will provoke conversation, and you sort of wonder, are we just circling the same location? Are we doing the same thing? Listening to some of the calls towards the end of Nick's show about the NHS, and you sort of think, well, it's the same when we talk about the police. Who really knows what's going on? You know what happened last time you went to hospital. You know what happened last time you called the police. You know what happens in your station if you're a member of the force, but you don't know what happens at the other end of the country or in entirely different circumstances. The newspapers like to jump on stories that involve foreign criminals more than they like to report upon native criminals, because that's the country that we've created post-Brexit. And again, the police will get it in the neck. Why haven't they done this? Why haven't they done that? They often can't. And shoplifting remains a particularly pungent practice. That really does speak to much more than fare dodging, I think. Perhaps it's time for honest Bob Jenrick to go out and try and catch a few shoplifters. It really does speak to a sense of, you know, that lovely analogy, probably my favourite analogy about the queue. I think it's my favourite analogy because it's so perfectly British. Albeit that the person who first introduced me to it was talking about the American electorate. But if you're standing in a queue, you are observing both ritual and rule, aren't you? You are doing things correctly when you stand in a queue, a figurative queue, a metaphorical queue, or an actual physical queue. That is why we hate people who push in. There's something really provocative about somebody who pushes into a queue, even if they do it with a sort of sanction, even if they, you know, come to meet their mate who's been queuing up and lets them into the space, or if one family member's gone to park the car and the other is nearly at the turnstile or nearly at the door, and then they come and join the one that's being queued. Even that annoys us a bit, right? Even though it's, I think, perfectly reasonable behaviour, there's a little bit of us that knows that will mean we have to stand in line for a little bit longer. Shoplifting speaks to that impulse. I mean, fare dodging does as well, but shoplifting really speaks to it. We'd all like to do a kind of supermarket sweep and walk out of the doors without having paid any money, but when people do it, it really hacks us off, doesn't it? And the police get it in the neck for that as well. And then, of course, again, because whenever there's a problem in this country, you can absolutely guarantee that right-wing commentators, columnists and editors will make it worse. So they pretend that the reason why the police aren't arresting shoplifters or catching criminals is because they're too busy celebrating Pride or dancing at the Notting Hill Carnival. You know, of all the nonsense that I have heard and read over my years in doing this job, the idea that the police dedicate meaningful and substantial amounts of time and energy to being nice, the idea that that is somehow an awful thing to do and or so widespread and commonplace that it impacts on the more harder-edged policing is got to be in the top 3 stupidest things that the UK media has created in the time that we've spent together. Oh, look, here's a photo. I remember taking a call I think she was a Gold Commander, but taking a call from a senior police officer with responsibility for the Notting Hill Carnival. And she just said to me, if a police officer is dancing with someone and a message comes over his radio that he's got to get to half a mile away really quickly because something's kicking off, what do you think he does? Do you think he continues his samba? Or do you think he immediately legs it towards wherever he's been directed to go? And even I, as someone who doesn't really fall for the stupidity of pretense when it comes to policing, even I sort of thought, oh yeah, I'd never really thought of that. Just because he was twerking 10 minutes ago doesn't mean that he's not sticking someone in handcuffs today, right now, at this minute. It's just nonsense. And the police get it on the neck over that as well. They get it in the neck for everything. And they get it in the neck from me sometimes because, the traditional stuff, the fact that the current commissioner still rejects the phrase institutional racism, which actually explains why cooperation level in some communities can be quite low because the perception is that the police are not on your side. I'm a white, heterosexual, middle-class man. And the police have always seemed to be on my side. So much so that I think my class probably means I'd get a little bit softer treatment in some circumstances than I would have done if I'd been born in different circumstances. So who do we know? Who do we trust? How do we do it? I don't know. Shall I read some messages just to give you a flavour of what I mean? Why not? Randomly. Or give or take randomly. As a police officer, I've seen the police getting squeezed in every direction, writes Craig in Hamilton, and support fades year on year. Too many people are waiting to jump on any indiscretion. I feel like the police are doing their job with one hand tied behind their back, and it's no longer a job I would encourage people to apply for. David says the real problem is that the police are being cut back, full stop. The Parks police have been disbanded. We no longer have a dedicated police unit in Greenwich Park. Safer neighbourhood team is being overwhelmed. John writes, my brother was a copper for 30 years, a man with common sense who loved helping people. Perhaps not the brightest star in the sky, but an honest bloke. However, they're now recruiting cops with no life experience and a distinct inability to communicate. I find this a little bit lazy, John, but it doesn't mean it's not true. Degrees are not needed at all. So they get bored and do a rubbish job for poor pay and are not supported when things go wrong. You've just veered from an excellent point to a rubbish point and then back to an excellent point. Again, it's strange, isn't it? And Paul says, welcome to the police bashing hour. As a former police officer of a decade, I left because it's a thankless task. The only one bashing the police here, Paul in Leicester, is you. Describing it as a thankless task. Overworked, under-supported and underappreciated by the populace. That's why they can't recruit. Well, there's 2 problems. They can't recruit because people don't want to join, and I think, to paraphrase John, it may be that the force is now attracting the wrong kind of people, or suboptimal people, and the second bit is they claim they can't afford to meet the bills. They can't afford to meet the recruitment targets. 13,000 officers are needed. The public will pay the price if they are not recruited. Police leaders warning yesterday in the aftermath of that spending review that it will be incredibly difficult to deliver the Prime Minister's election pledge within the lifetime of this Parliament. They project a £1.2 billion shortfall in police funding, but they always do. You always have. In defence and police, and to a certain degree the NHS, although I've lived through periods where most people seem to feel the NHS was being satisfactorily funded, the world of defence and the world of policing has always, I think, been punctuated with complaints about underfunding. I'm not sure any general or chief constable has ever come out and said, do you know what? We've got enough to do the job we want to do. And that's one of life's truths. That is just one of the facts of life. They will always claim they haven't got enough. Sometimes they will be absolutely accurate. Other times they will be less accurate. Which means we don't know for sure what's going on. But there is a genuine air of peril, I think, surrounding our police services. And when it is both the policed and the police that are feeling it, then we have to talk about it. Acting National Chair of the Police Federation has accused Rachel Reeves of failing to listen to police officers or indeed to the Home Secretary in the lead up to the review. So the tensions between Yvette Cooper and Rachel Reeves see Yvette Cooper being perceived as being on the side of the police but not getting the money that she needs to do a better job. So what is wrong? Sometimes I don't like questions that are too big. It's a weird business, mine. Sometimes if I ask a big question, the goalposts are too far apart and you almost think it's not worth having a shot. The goalposts are too close together and you think it's not worth having a shot because you're never going to score. But if they're too far apart, sometimes, I don't mean vague necessarily, but too general. But sometimes it's the right question to ask because it means everybody can have a pop. Whether you are policed or policing, whether you are in the job or not in the job, whether you're retired from the job. What is wrong? What is wrong with this world? And police getting attacked on the streets of England and latterly of Northern Ireland, most recently. Getting, targets of genuine vitriol and hatred. And yet these are people who sign up to look after the rest of us. Hey, historic problems notwithstanding, I'm always drawn to the people who run towards trouble as the rest of us run away from it. Whether you're talking about firefighters, soldiers, paramedics or police officers, society should revere the people that run towards trouble as the rest of us run away from it. The people we call when we are in bother. I want you to tell me what you think is currently wrong. And the way into it is to ask this question. Why are the police struggling to recruit? Why don't people want to join the police service? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. What's gone wrong and why don't people want to join anymore? And that should provide an invitation to almost everybody affected by policing, which is everybody, to take a line on this issue. You're probably aware of some reports of an aeroplane bound for London Gatwick crashing at an airport in India. We will bring you more details on that story as and when they appear. But the phone-in that we begin our time together with today is this. What's wrong? How do we as ordinary people get a line on what the problems are when, for good or for ill, the police are always complaining about being poorly funded and the public are almost always complaining about being poorly policed? What's the truth and what's the problem? And why don't people want to join? It's 10:16.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:18. At least 242 people on board the plane that has crashed in India, a plane bound for London Gatwick. We'll get all the details, all the latest developments on that unfolding tragedy before the 10:30 bulletin. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, police forces will struggle to fund 13,000 recruits, top officers warn. What's wrong with the police, both in terms of the public's perception of them not doing a good job and the widespread belief, and I think the statistics support it, that people don't want to join up anyway. Just as a mark of the quality of contributor to this programme, listen to this from Barbarella. Morning, James. In the last year, I interviewed all 43 chief constables in my job, and I was a bit cynical beforehand. I expected politicking and excuses, but the issues are real and deep, and no one, whether the public, the press or the politicians, want to know. The police can't strike, they can't speak out publicly, they're just expected to take it. Most have to go out on their own. They're often unable to double crew despite rising violence against them. They have no time to do proactive policing or prevention, which they genuinely want to do. They're not stupid. And as the rest of the public sphere crumbles, they're forced to step in. So school exclusions, mental health, social care, etc. They have to shift their resources around constantly to address the latest politically decided priority. I could go on all day. I love that message because it admits a change of mind. And I'm not going to punctuate this entire hour with reminders of how awful the police have been and continue to be in many contexts, particularly racism. But I am going to tell you that if we don't value our police force, we will get the police force we deserve. And it won't be pretty. And I wonder whether we are already there. Claire's in Ealing to kick things off. Claire, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I've spoken to you a few times now. I used to be in the police. I joined in 2014 and I left in 2017.
Okay.
When I joined, I'd not long graduated law school. I decided I'd always wanted to be a detective. It's all I ever wanted to do. It's still all I ever want to do, but now I'm not going to. And
okay.
I'll explain why.
Yeah, do.
So I was very idealistic, and I really believed that, you know, in order to make the police better, you've got to get in there and do it. We had 3 months of training, which I believe they used to have more, but I can't remember how much, to be honest.
Okay.
But it was, you know, it was okay. But then we got to actual uniform policing, you know, first day out. And from what I'm led to believe, previously to that, you used to go out and, you know, you'd be crewed up with people who were sort of taking you out and actually sort of working with you, training you a bit more. We were just shoved out in the, because I started on response, so we were just shoved out with another officer. They were driving, you know, we were the operator, and it was just, you know.
So just thrown in at the deep end, in other words, without any armbands.
Sink or swim. Yeah, exactly. I remember going out on like my first day, and we came across a fatal car accident. I was continuity officer. I went to hospital with him. He died. I didn't even know how to like use the radio properly. I knew how to use it, but I didn't know what I was supposed to say to anyone.
That's extraordinary. I had no idea. And is this funding, or is it more systemic than that?
It is funding, because they cut the they cut the amount of officers. But, I mean, it was fine. I was sensible enough. I had enough training to know how to, like, deal with the problem. It wasn't catastrophic or anything. I just sort of asked someone, who do I tell?
I get it, but I think people listening would be very surprised to learn that wasn't already baked into you before you went out on the beat. So was there a breaking point, or was it a boiled frog scenario? Because 3 years isn't a very long time, but presumably
it was much worse, unfortunately. So a few months in, me and a few others went to a horrific situation where a man was holding his sister's baby hostage. He ended up stabbing a couple of the officers, myself and the other probationer. I just didn't know what to do. Yeah. It wasn't good, and I feel like, a lot of the people on my team like blamed me, and I blame myself. But it was really difficult, because then it was just the bullying started, and it was my supervisor putting me in very dangerous situations, or just really situations. Oh, sorry, excuse my French.
That's okay. Did we lose that? No, we'll lose that. So,
okay.
It sounds very lonely.
It was. Sorry. As I said before, you had to cut that out. They put me in very bad situations, or very lonely, very crap situations. Oh, sorry, I've done it again.
Okay. I'm 24 minutes after 10 is the time. Thank you, Claire. And that is personal experience, and that's what I mean. It counts. It's real. But it's not data. The sense that the police, and that is 2014 to 2017. So I immediately find myself. I don't know whether Claire's second swear just crept through the barriers there. So my apologies for that. the Theresa May speech. Do you remember when she accused them of scaremongering? I always remember that. It was a bit of a moment for me politically, when the Home Secretary essentially mocked the police for claiming that reducing police numbers would reduce their ability to police communities. An extraordinary moment at the Police Federation conference, and a gentleman who'd won the Community Police Officer of the Year award really tore a strip off her and pointed out something I hadn't thought of before. Pointed out that community policing means that not only are you looking after people, but you're also keeping an eye on trouble. And he policed the area directly adjacent to the part of Manchester where the Manchester Arena bomber came from. And people at the time of that atrocity pointed out that a community policing could perhaps have seen alarms go off a little earlier in that scumbag's case. Just a thought. 25 after 10 is the time. Phone lines are open. Why would people not join the police today? 0345 6060 973. And from the inside or the outside, what's gone wrong? I don't like narratives that presume a point of negativity, but I don't know anyone's going to look me in the eye and tell me nothing's gone wrong. Do you see what I mean? I like positive stories, and I shall share some, but I don't think it's remiss of me or irresponsible of me to begin this conversation from a point of negativity. There is a problem here. I want to pinpoint precisely what it is. Fraser Knight is with me because this flight to London that has crashed at an airport in India carrying, I think, 242 people is a story that understandably urgent. What do we know, Fraser?
Yeah, James, a lot of details sort of filtering through to us, this happening in the past sort of half an hour or so. But what we have been told is that an Air India flight that was taking off from Ahmedabad airport in Western India on its way to London Gatwick has crashed, and the pictures that are coming through from Western India, we can see huge plumes of black smoke, and we're currently verifying some, of that footage as it comes through, and stretchers that have been taken by medics to some of the people there. We've had statements through from the Civil Aviation Minister from the Indian government, who has said we are on the highest alert. He has said he is shocked and devastated to learn of this crash, and reports that this plane crashed just minutes, mere minutes after takeoff. In fact, less than a minute after takeoff at just 625 feet, according to the flight tracker radar. This is suggested to have happened just outside the perimeter of this airport, suggesting it may have been in a residential area, and London Gatwick Airport confirming as well that flight was due to land here in the UK at 6:25 p.m. tonight. So confirmation of that Air India flight carrying more than 240 people, it's believed, crashing just seconds after takeoff, and London Gatwick, as I say, confirming that was due to land at 6:25 this evening. So
there will be people listening to this now who are expecting to meet people off that plane later today. Probably too early for us to help them with any hotline numbers or means of establishing exactly what's going on at either end of the flight.
Yeah, the only statement we've had from Gatwick so far is that we can confirm that flight I think that's an AL171 that crashed on departure from Ahmedabad Airport today was due to land at London Gatwick at 18:25. They say more information will follow, and I will say they're posting that on their social media channels, so it's worth keeping an eye on that. But yeah, some of the images that are coming out of there, it looks like a serious crash. Huge plumes of black smoke. As I say, the reports that happened just outside the perimeter of the airport in what looks like and sounds like it would be a residential airport with more than 240 people on board, leaving Ahmedabad Airport heading for London Gatwick this evening.
So it's a flight radar, the sort of tracking service, reporting that the signal disappeared less than a minute after takeoff, just 10 seconds. 232 passengers and 12 crew members on board. Emergency teams have been activated. Director General of the Directorate of Civil Aviation in India has just told the Associated Press that the flight of Boeing 787 did indeed crash into a residential area called Megani Nagar approximately 5 minutes after taking off. So highly likely, I think, that this story is going to get more is going to get sadder as the details emerge, and indeed as they do, we will bring them directly to you. Thank you, Fraser. It's coming up to 10:30. We continue our conversation alongside any developments with regard to this unfolding tragedy about what is wrong with the police and why it has been permitted to happen, if you like, in a country where we should really revere and do traditionally revere the people who run towards trouble as the rest of us run away from it. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
32 is the time. I'm getting a few messages like this. Hi, James. I'm a serving police officer with a rather distinctive voice, which is why I have chosen to send you a message rather than call in. Well, I don't know. You could probably have disguised, as long as you didn't open by saying hello, 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 you probably would have got away with it, but I'll read it anyway. There are multiple factors affecting this, but most of them are things you will only notice once you've joined the job. This includes the workload, the type of work, the level of training, the level of resources, and the current levels of experience. I think Emma highlighted a lot of those points as well. In reality, though, the thing which makes recruitment harder is simple. Would you take a job that requires you to run towards danger, to work 40 hours a week on average, to work shifts at all hours of the day and night with no idea of when you will finish? And you don't mention, but I will, the daily risk that you face when you're on the job, when you're on the beat, when you're on duty, for a starting salary, he goes on, of less than 30,000 a year and a maximum salary of just over 40. When you now have to work for 35 years just to get your pension. That clearly is a major factor of it. And I'm not doing this for any form of false balance, but this is from Hannah. Sorry, James, but people don't value the police force because of their failures to protect victims and uphold justice. This narrative that the police are the victims because of people's mistrust is ridiculous. They have gotten themselves into this position with their institutionalised abuse, misogyny and racism. The whole system needs a serious overhaul. And yet, of course, in the meantime, who polices us? That is what we want to know. I should also tell you, with regard to the flight bound for Gatwick Airport that has crashed in India with 232 passengers and 12 crew members on board, that as well as on-air updates from myself and my colleagues, the LBC app will be providing constant coverage and constant updates as more details emerge. But what we do know is that plane, less than 5 minutes after takeoff, has come down in a residential area. So the developments are likely to be pretty grim, and of course, given that the plane was bound for Gatwick, there will be people in this country who are currently despairing and desperate for further information. 10:35 is the time. Back to the phones, back to the police, back to the question of the morning. Francis is in Sevenoaks. Francis, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, James.
Hello, Francis.
What I'd like to say, my son is a special police constable with the Met. He's done the job for 3 years. He's IPS trained, which means he's got all the powers that a regular police officer has got.
Right.
He's applied to join the force. He got the job. He was filling out his vetting. Obviously, it's very long-winded. He got halfway through it. They put a block on it. This was in January, and said due to funding, they couldn't accept him. And he's still doing the job. He loves it. He loves the job. In fact, he was out last night. He got in early hours this morning, and he's gone straight to his day job. Gosh. He's given the police so many hours because he loves it. He loves it. He wants to join. He just literally cannot get in.
And they're telling him they haven't got the money. They haven't got the money.
Yes. He's passed all the tests. Everything that you need to do, he has done, and he's actually doing the job. In fact, last week he apprehended someone that had a knife. Gosh. And I don't even know if he's insured. What if he couldn't work doing his day job? How's he going to get paid? Because
got injured
he's
on
doing
duty.
this for free.
I don't know the details either, but I would somewhat naively presume that God forbid that should ever happen, that the system is built to accommodate it. This is it. So Sadiq Khan saying last night that he worries the spending review could result in insufficient funding for the Met and fewer police officers. There's certain people on social media desperate to blame him every time a crime is committed, whether it's in London or not in some cases, but actual in the job, wanting to do more and being told that the money simply isn't there. What can we? And it wasn't announced yesterday, so the situation hasn't got any better for him in the last 24 hours.
No. It hasn't, and they told him that it would hopefully be June, that he could do the vetting, and obviously that is long-winded because we all have to be checked, and they go into bank details, as it should be.
Yes, of course.
It's extremely stringent. But this is because he's putting his life on hold. He really is, because that's all he wants to do. He loves the job. You've got people saying that they don't like it, it's stressful. Well, he has that stress, and he does a day job. And in fact, this morning, I don't even know it was the early hours he got in, because he has to do the paperwork as well. He does everything that a regular police officer does, but
he's not a regular police officer, and he can't get signed up because of the money. What do you, just as mum?
Yes.
When you see images like the ones in Ballymena at the moment, or the ones during the riots over the summer, and people are lobbing petrol bombs or bricks at police officers who are just trying to do their job, how do you feel as his mum?
Oh, I think it is disgraceful how the police are treated, because I tell you what, I'd much rather live in a place that have got the police that we've got than a place that hasn't. And I worry every time he goes out. I worry, but it's what he wants to do. That's his choice.
And we need more lads like him, and yet even he's not getting looked after. They're not rolling out I'd roll out the red carpet for him, but it's simply not happening. And of course there'll be people keen to point the finger of blame anywhere except where it actually belongs, which is in this case probably Rachel Reeves and the inheritance of 14 years of austerity. So a political decision to ramp up funding for the NHS and not ramp up funding for the police, and the rationale behind that decision is quite hard to unravel, unless, of course, they're of the view that the problems are not as acute as many people contend. Francis, I could tell you're very proud of your boy, and rightly so. Thank you for sharing that, and let's hope that passage onto the force proper is unblocked as soon as possible. Again, quite a few messages like this coming in. I'm a serving officer, 28 years, several forces, including the Met. We did 18 full residential weeks training. That was full-on practical training. Then another 18 months of rather tough probation, where you got a solid grounding in all areas of core police work. Again, this refers back to Emma's call, and her experiences just over 10 years ago when she joined were nothing like this. During that probation, you'd often be paired up with an experienced officer who would let you take the lead, but was there to step in and help as and when needed. You were part of a team, and crucially, you really felt that. Today, the training is a few months, often sitting in front of a PC doing online packages. It's very insular, singular, and impersonal. Then the probationary period, the most important experienced people on your team will only have a couple of years service themselves, so you haven't got the experienced officer doing the stepping in and the guiding. It's not quite the blind leading the blind, James, but the thorough and comprehensive training is a thing of the past. Many older experienced officers have retired. Many have left early. And retaining those who are new to the force is bad. So we now have teams of young in-service officers, many not that experienced, less and less of them doing more and more work. It's crippling, high stress and relentless. I genuinely would not recommend anyone to join the police force now, which makes it all the more significant, I think, that people like Francis's son are still keen to do so. Greg's in Oxford. Greg, what would you like to say?
Well, hi there. I've just listened to what your previous contributor had to say.
Yes.
And absolutely bang on. I've got little else to add, really. I'd echo everything that they've said in their text to you.
Do me a chronology then. When did things start getting worse, and why?
I did 1984 to 2014 with Thames Valley Police, which is a large metropolitan police force adjacent to the Met. I became an inspector in 96, and I would say from about 2010, 2011, the cuts and the crunch started to be felt everywhere. Inspectors and above, it was all about saving money, doing more for less. And in my last 2 or 3 years, I was a Federation rep as well. And I went along to 2 or 3 of those Federation conferences, and I think the rot started when Theresa May really started to show real disdain for policing.
What was that about, do you think, Greg? Because, I'm not a genius by any stretch of the imagination, but in my sort of lazy world view, I always think of the Conservative Party being very much in lockstep with law and order, being very much in lockstep with the police. And austerity notwithstanding, Theresa May chose to go further. She accused the Federation of scaremongering, or crying wolf, I think was the phrase.
Crying wolf, yeah.
That she used. And do we know why? I mean, was she just trying to sort of reverse engineer the cuts and pretend that they were not going to be harmful because she'd been handed the job of delivering them? Or was there something deeper? Because it upset a lot of coppers, that, didn't it?
It did. I mean, there was one year at the Federation conference and she was speaking. I'm not sure if it was the Cry Wolf speech. I think it was the year before, but she was definitely on the big screen. You could see her venting her spleen. There was spittle coming out. She was so passionate about her negative views on policing. And some of the criticism was valid, but the bulk of it was just a pile-on. It was a pile-on by the Home Secretary.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
We felt awful. First time in my career, nearly 30 years then, where I thought, they just don't get it. They don't understand. I don't feel we're supported.
And they make your life worse. I mean, it's hard to know how much of it is due to public feeling and how much of it is just due to the proliferation of social media. But it feels to me, in this country at this time, that the police have got bigger targets on their back than ever before.
Yeah. Well, you can have a good day, you can have a bad day. You'll certainly hit the press on a bad day. It's very rare that you hear anything positive.
And someone's going to stick a camera in your face and load up clips that might be out of context or unrepresentative, and that's a nightmare for an ordinary officer.
Yeah, when I was a young PC, there was still a sense of camaraderie, and the public were with you. And if you were rolling about on the floor with someone, there was a real, genuine expectation that they would come and help you. These days, the impression is, and the reality seems to be, they're going to be standing back with
and filming it for clicks, for clicks and giggles. Final question.
Or if not wading in to support the fellow or the individual.
Giving you a kick, giving you a clout. That's I mean, yeah. What do you feel when you see scenes like the ones in Ballymena overnight, or indeed in various English towns during the riots of last summer after the Southport killings and the misinformation put out on social media, but specifically when police are getting clattered by members of the public while they're out there trying to protect members of the public? How does that feel as an officer?
Well, I've not seen a lot of it, but there's echoes of Southport, which is there's unrest. There's mischief making by people who should know better. Social media helps them. Yeah. And the police front line always gets it in the neck.
Yeah, that's true. It is. 'Twas ever thus, isn't it? So some elements of this conversation are indeed 'twas ever thus. Other elements of it feel different. And if you're going to track back the difference or the feeling of difference, all roads seem to lead at the moment to Theresa May. And of course, to be fair to David Cameron and George Osborne's programme of austerity, political ideology built, as Alexei Sayle put it better than anyone else, on the idea that the global financial crisis of 2008 was a consequence of there being too many libraries in Wolverhampton, or indeed too many police officers in the Thames Valley. It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10:48. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I wouldn't want to be a copper, a social worker, a teacher, a carer, a doctor or a nurse in this country, writes Jimbo. A number of the public are intolerable. And Michael makes a point that I'm going to pick up on as well, because a few of you have said similar things. And there is a point in this, but I think you take it in the wrong direction having made that point. If the police had held up their hands to institutional racism, misogyny and other crimes, the public would have stayed on side more. By being a law unto themselves, not punishing the wrong uns properly and taking a defensive posture, they've made the public lose the trust that they will do the right thing by us. I saw it firsthand during the Sarah Everard vigil, which was a moment that saw these thoughts crystallise, especially when the police tried to blame the women protesting as a justification for their own brutality. There's some truth in that, but the people who are lobbing bricks at the police in Ballymena at the moment are also in the process of setting fire to the homes of Filipino families for the crime of being foreign. So it's unlikely that they are motivated by disdain at some of the institutional racism that has been found in some police services. On the contrary, they would be applauding institutional racism. and delighted by it. And for the texter who said, do you ever wonder why these people are rioting? The answer is every day I explain why these people are rioting. They are either racists, violent racist thugs, or, and this also applies to the riots that unfolded after Southport, the Farage riots, or they have been successfully groomed and gaslit by race provocateurs to believe that everybody born somewhere else is somehow the root of their own personal problems. So there's no great mystery about why people are rioting, unless, of course, you are a racist thug and you like to use phrases like legitimate concerns to describe the people setting fire to the home of a Filipino factory worker who took the call while on a night shift to discover that his car had just been torched. 10:50 is the time. Back to the British police, the UK police, and the problems that they face. Peter is in Rugeley. I can tell you that this is Peter Fahey, the former Chief Constable of Greater Manchester and a former head of Prevent. So if anyone knows what they're talking about, it's him. But for the purposes of this conversation, Peter, you are just another caller. Peter in Rugeley, what would you like to say?
Well, I think you said that we revere the police. I'm not sure that was my experience. I joined in the 1980s, and I think we need to stand back and ask, we have one of the very few unarmed police forces around the world. We've also got a very strange system of having lots of local police forces, which isn't really in line with the nature of crime today. We don't have a national police force like most of the other countries in the world. And that's because, in my experience, the British public have a very healthy scepticism of the power of the state. But I think we've reached the stage now where in policing is becoming so ineffective in terms of investigating crime and invisibility and dealing with antisocial behaviour that the public are losing, trust and confidence. Obviously, things like Sarah Everard do affect confidence. But I think the main issue is really the public's experience of when they call the police, very little happens. And the trouble is that then massively demotivates individual police officers who join to try and do the job and end up spending a lot of time apologising. And the other thing really which happened through the whole period of austerity and the cuts is the police really moved from law enforcement to more and more what they would see as social work, dealing with vulnerable children, relationships, issues like that.
And because nobody else was. I mean, it really is that simple, isn't it? It's the buck stops with the thin blue line in those cases.
Yeah, James, and if you're dealing with a really vulnerable child or you're dealing with somebody who you think is going to commit suicide and there aren't other agencies to help, and at the end of the day you have to go away and deal with another call, that weighs very heavily on your mind as to what will happen if a tragedy occurs. And at the same time, there's been a huge increase in the level of recording. If I think what it was like when I joined in the 1980s, there was very little recording, very little accountability. There was a lot of freedom for individual police officers. There was a lot of things wrong with that.
Oh, well, there was an awful lot of things wrong with that. So, I mean, this is missing from your analysis. How much of this, I don't dispute anything that you've said, but how much of what we see today could be construed as having been brought upon the police by the police or by policing? You mentioned Sarah Everard. There's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more to it, to that. We've got very confused about the role of the police. Chief constables now want a complete reform of the police. They want to reduce massively the number of police forces. They want to be able to deal with online crime, which at the end of the day is the most common form of crime now, in a totally different way. I think big issues about whether we regard policing as a profession or not. In some ways we do, in some ways we don't. We regard it as a military. So that makes the whole thing very confused. I mean, we're working really with a structure that was, brought about in the 1960s, and we're working, whether we like it or not, with a criminal justice system and a court system that, again, is massively failing, where less than 3% of women, get a conviction from rape. And so, the whole system is not working, and therefore it's very difficult if you're on the front line trying to explain that to a victim of crime. And as I say, just massively demotivating.
I don't like these kind of questions, really, but sometimes I have to ask them. If I made you point at one single figure, thing, moment, decision that kind of almost top of the pops when it comes to the decline that you've just described, what would you point at? What would be the biggest factor in this process?
It was around 2010 with a complete change in the attitude of the government, the massive cuts. You mentioned Damien O'Reilly, who was Community Police Officer of the Year in Manchester. that was the golden time for neighbourhood policing, for the connection with the local people, particularly in the most challenging areas. And I remember going out one day, and we had an amazing day out in the community where the public came out of their houses to tell me that somebody, PCSO, had changed their lives.
Wow.
I knew going away that was probably the high point of policing.
Good Lord.
And over the next few years...
another road that leads back to austerity, Theresa May, David Cameron in Nice with his trotters up, or wherever he is this week, I don't know, to paraphrase.
But I think also, James, that, OK, if you want to make reductions, fine, but then you also have to reform to allow the organisation, to actually cope with a different role, a different level of resources. And I was a part of the commission in the Republic of Ireland that looked at policing wholesale and has brought around a number of changes and made it more fit for purpose. And we just haven't had that in the UK. We haven't had a Royal Commission since the 1960s. And as I say, the trouble is, whatever the concerns are about legitimacy and institutional racism, the fact is at the end of the day, you need a police force that you feel is effective. Because otherwise what happens is that people like me and you that can afford it, we get our Ring doorbells, we get our CCTV cameras, we live in nice areas, some live in gated communities. We see more and more shops just buying private security. We see more areas like that huge area behind King's Cross, which is now private land, where there are private security guards deciding who can come in here and who can't. And it just opens up that gap. And that was predicted. I remember going on courses where that was predicted in the 1980s and talking about...
Do you really think that's right? Because I don't... I just... rattling through my mental Rolodex. I got a mate in Surrey who lives on a golf course, which might technically count as a gated community, but there's no security at the front. I don't know anyone who lives in the circumstances that you've just described. So,
I worked in Surrey for a while, and it was quite a lot. And some of it is not a physical gate.
Okay.
There are other measures that people can take to make it clear that this is the sort of not of area that we want you in. But it is that whole thing that, on the whole, people in the poorer communities, they're much more likely to be victims of crime. And as I say, they can't sometimes afford the measures.
And then class kicks in, and a certain type of politician thinks it doesn't really matter if it's not happening to people like me. Final question. You've been seeing some of the scenes unfolding in Northern Ireland overnight, 2 nights now. The police getting it in the neck from pretty much every imaginable angle. How actually, scratch that. Would you join the force today if you had your time again?
I would, James, because it is the most wonderful thing to be able to serve the public and to be part of that sort of organisation. But I think it is a lot harder than when I joined. And I think we just need to remember the officers in Northern Ireland are real people. They've got families. Some of them are going to face life-changing injuries. And often there's a lot of focus when an officer dies, quite rightly.
Yes.
But we don't see the number of officers that have to be retired out injured. And it affects them for the rest of their life. It affects their family, and they can no longer do the job that they absolutely love because of an injury. So, this is really serious.
And it's important that you've made that point. I'm grateful to you for doing so, Peter. Thank you. Peter Fahy, former Chief Constable of Greater Manchester, former head of Prevent, making many, many points there, but also stressing something that becomes a consensus when we have these conversations. And I am going to take a moment to reflect on it, with your permission, because it's insane how disconnected public discourse is from media discourse. Everybody knows that almost all of the problems that we face in this country have been either caused or hugely exacerbated by the programme of austerity that the Tories brought in 2010 and then magnified, quadrupled, quintupled, whatever factor you prefer, by Brexit. And yet, because so much of the media encouraged you to vote for Brexit, and because all of the media pretty much in this country was cheerleading for David Cameron, cheerleading for austerity, cheerleading for Theresa May, cheerleading for George Osborne, even latterly cheerleading for Liz flipping Truss, the conversation is broken. The discourse is broken. People who know what they're talking about know where the roots of these malaises lie. And yet, from Kemi Badenoch turning up at PMQs right through to Andrew Neil on the front page of the Daily Mail today, queuing up to attack Keir Starmer, who hasn't even been in Downing Street for a year, when all of the problems he's charged with fixing have been handed to him on a polished platter by David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and probably least of all, Rishi Sunak. But, of course, you wouldn't know that listening to most commentators who were too busy tickling the toes of Boris Johnson and praising Liz Truss's budget to the rafters to acknowledge reality. And there's Andrew Neil on the front of the Mail this morning, completely ignoring And Alistair Heath on the front of the Telegraph. That is probably one I'll say for unhinged headlines, because I want to pass you to the news next, after which we'll catch up with Fraser Knight on the very latest developments regarding that Air India flight bound for Gatwick Airport, which crashed shortly after takeoff in Ahmedabad earlier this morning. Also reports coming through now that 53 British nationals were on that flight. So a further update, in addition to whatever is in the bulletin, with Fraser after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 11. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Fraser Knight is back in the studio as more details emerge, and as we feared, they are likely to be increasingly grim the more we find out. Fraser, where are we at the moment?
James, we've just had confirmation of how many people were on board and where they were from. There were 242 people on board that plane. Of them, 53 people were British, 169 Indian, 1 Canadian, and 7 Portuguese nationals. Now, this is information that's obviously coming through to us quite slowly after this crash happened. We understand about 2 hours ago, taking off from Ahmedabad Airport in Western India, crashing then into what seems to be a residential area called Magari Nagar. Now, some of the videos on social media, while unconfirmed, it does appear that some of the area where the debris is at its worst, it looks like it may have been a construction site, but of course there's still a lot more details to work through here. We're seeing images of firefighters hosing water onto debris, huge plumes of black smoke after this plane took off. It was flight AI-171 heading to London Gatwick, and in a statement from London Gatwick Airport, they have confirmed it was due to land here at 6:25 p.m. this afternoon. Now, we have had a number of statements, as you can imagine, coming through, including from the chairman of Air India, who has said, with profound sorrow, I confirm that Air India Flight 171 was involved in a tragic accident today. Our thoughts and deepest condolences are with the families and loved ones of all those affected. There has also been a helpline number set up by Air India, which I'm afraid it has gone from my screen in front of me, but I will find that for you in just a second. It's a number, of course, many people will have questions about who was on board. Here it is, I'll give it to you now. 1800 5691 444. So that's 1800 5691 444, and that's an Air India helpline number for people to phone with any questions they have. So 53 British nationals on board that plane that has crashed in Western India on its way to London Gatwick Airport. And as I say, some of the images that are coming through, really devastating scenes. You can see just, charred debris, huge plumes of smoke, firefighters hosing water onto that debris, and also some images of rescuers taking stretchers to some of the wounded as well.
Wounded passengers or wounded members of the public? Do we know at this stage?
We don't know. No, we haven't had any confirmation of any deaths or injuries. Of course, there will be more information that comes through as we get that, but yeah, it doesn't look great.
It is hard to exaggerate the severity of the scenes, and one doesn't want to speculate, but there is unlikely to be any good news, I imagine, in the course of the coming hours. Yeah, I
get that feeling as well. There has been a bit more news as well about the pilot apparently made a mayday signal before the crash happened. We have heard from the regulator in India that said the captain had 8,200 hours of flying experience, the co-pilot had 1,100 hours of flying experience. Also reports that this was the first crash that we have seen of this type of airline, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, a wide-body twin-engined plane. There's a lot of information coming out here, but a lot of people will have questions as to how this happened. But right now, all the focus turning to the crash site just outside the perimeter of Ahmedabad Airport in Western India.
Fraser Knight, thank you very much indeed. And as Fraser said, more on that as it happens. 53 British nationals on that flight that has crashed in Ahmedabad in India, the Air India London-bound flight. And that helpline number, once again, 1-800-569-1444. 8 minutes after 11 is the time now. I'd also remind you of the LBC app, which will be bringing developments to your attention as they happen, even more quickly than we can do on air this morning. 9 minutes after 11 is the time. I mean, I'm keeping a very close eye on that story, obviously, but we must move on as well in the context of the normal radio programme. And I want to move to a strange story next. Serious, but also potentially strange. When I started doing this job, if I said to you, make a list of things I used to talk about all the time that I don't talk about anymore, what would you put on the list? I mean, I'm now speaking to the relatively small number of people that have been here for the last 20 years or whatever it is, or even the last 15. I don't mean the silly stuff. I used to play a lot of games on the radio until, I'd like to say maturity intervened, but it wasn't. It was management. I used to play a lot of silly games on the radio until management told me to stop. I even used to play a game called Beat the Sweet. Can you believe this? LBC now, such a powerhouse in British media, and this humble programme now, of course, the most popular on the station. But back in the day, we got away with ludicrous levels of infancy or infantile behaviour. So I would play a game where I would eat a sweet, and I was very professional about it in that I wouldn't just pretend to eat a sweet. I would eat a sweet, and then you would ring in and ask me questions to which I could only answer yes or no. And you would try and establish what sweet I was eating. You think I'm lying, don't you? You think I'm making this up. Apparently Andrew Marr's bringing it back on his programme later this evening. I genuinely used to do this, and it was a lot of fun. But there were some subjects that were a little bit more grown up than that. And it's not time for a comeback, and it's obviously not Brexit, because I would still talk about that the world has moved on. There's no point trying to stop the madness of Brexit, because the madness of Brexit has happened. So no, it's not that. It's not tattoos, and it's not media studies, although SEMA obviously has been here for much of the last couple of decades. And yeah, I did used to talk. No, you can't have obesity either. I've changed my views on that, and I hope stopped being such a wombat. But I still talk about it a lot because it's still a really important and huge issue. But something I used to talk about almost all the time. Well, not all the time, but a lot. It was probably in my top 5 topics. It was a hardy perennial, and it hasn't gone away, and it certainly hasn't got better. If anything, it's got worse. And I never talk about it anymore. And I almost can't remember how I used to talk about it when I did. Has anybody got it? Nobody's got it. I'm not bringing back Beat the Sweet. I never should have mentioned it. It's not cannabis. No, I did probably talk about that more back in the day than I do now, but it has moved on. The story, it's not. I certainly haven't abandoned it. And it wasn't Kidderminster either. I used to talk about SUVs all the time, so much so that I bumped into a lad from school about 15 years ago, and he said, I think he was trying to be a bit rude, but I could be wrong. He may have just been reflecting the reality of what we were talking about together at the time. He said, yes, you're on the radio, aren't you? I heard you doing something. I was in a taxi, and you talk about SUVs all the time, don't you? You talk about Chelsea tractors all the time. And I thought, well, I don't talk about them all the time. And he made it sound trivial. He made it sound as if it wasn't a very important issue. I used to think it was a hugely important issue. And it's back in the news today. The rising bonnet height of new cars presents a clear and growing threat to children in the UK. It's a new report showing that consumer demand for these vehicles has continued to grow despite a backlash against them. In fact, the trend is for ever higher vehicles. They're getting higher and higher and higher, which sharply and measurably increases the likelihood of death in the event of striking a pedestrian. It comes from the advocacy group Transport and Environment, and it finds that the average bonnet heights of new cars sold in Europe and the UK rose from 77 centimetres in 2010 to 84 centimetres in 2024. It means that children as old as 9 can be invisible to drivers in the tallest cars. Now, there are a couple of... It's not a motoring... Well, I suppose it is in a way, but it was more about people, because I used to speak in very unpleasant terms about the people who drive these vehicles. Part of the problem I have is that everyone drives them now. I think it's fair to say that we lost that battle. And to describe you as selfish and obnoxious and uncaring and callous, it may be accurate, but unfortunately people I know and love are going to be included in that category. So we're due a new car, and we won't contemplate getting one of these. I would get a bit holier than thou about it back in the day and say, how can anybody possibly get one of these things? But when you read about the difference in death likelihood or the simple fact that a child is killed every day on our roads, and making these cars larger makes children invisible, the question asked by Barbara Stoller, director at this advocacy group, is how is that acceptable? So, I mean, I want to know why. Why are these cars getting higher? I kind of want to know why you drive one when you know that the likelihood of you causing major harm to an entirely innocent pedestrian is hugely increased by the height or the size of your car. But I more than either of those want to know about the backlash. Why has the backlash not worked? Why... can I do a phone-in about why people like me have stopped talking about something when it's actually me who stopped talking about it? If anyone can answer that question, it should be me. Why did this one drop off the radar, do you think? I mean, it's such a... I absolutely used to fill my boots with this. I used to hate it. I still do. I still get a little ripple of revulsion when I see one of these vehicles around, particularly if it's in an area where there's a school or where there's a lot of children crossing the road. But it's completely disappeared in my professional context. I've never sat here and thought to myself, probably for 10 years, I've never sat here and thought to myself, we should weigh in on that again. Can I do that as a phone-in? Can I do a phone-in about why I've stopped talking about... No, I can't. I can do a phone-in about what has happened to the backlash. Do people... I'll tell you what I want to know. Do people still hate them? 0345 6060973. It's almost as if it's become pointless articulating that hatred because they are so ubiquitous, because they are absolutely everywhere now. Is that why we've gone quiet? I still find them deeply obnoxious, but it's a bit like finding McDonald's obnoxious. There's just so many of them that you can't really make a meaningful stand against them. Is it still there? 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. Is the hatred, and I use the word advisedly, is it still there? When you read something as statistically stark as the likelihood of death, the invisibility of a child, the increase, why have they got higher? Why on earth have they got higher in the last 14, 15 years? 0345 6060973. And I've been in them, obviously, in the passenger seat. And you have a sort of sense of superiority and security, but you are being told constantly that you're going to cause enormous damage to people. So why have they got higher? Why have they got bigger? 0345 6060973. And am I alone in this? I mean, I'm feeling my anger dissipate until I actually return to the topic as I'm doing today. What's happened? What happened to the backlash? 0345 6060973. Do you still feel repelled, feel revulsion when you see someone bombing around in a vehicle that's 10 times bigger than they need and measurably more likely to cause pain and misery to entirely innocent pedestrians? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. The driver of a Ram TRX pickup would be unable to see children aged up to 9 who were standing directly in front of the vehicle. The driver of a Land Rover Defender would not see children aged up to 4.5. There's no legal restriction on how high a bonnet can be. They're calling for a limit in the UK or the EU, but at the moment there's no limit at all, and it has reached 84 centimetres in the last 14 years. I don't get this, and I want your help in understanding it. But most of all, I want to know how lonely I am. I want to know how many other people actually would, if it was properly organised, express deep dissatisfaction, disgust, disdain at these. I mean, I really hate them, but I've somehow felt my hate dissolve and disappear and dissipate over the course of the last 15 years. Almost exactly the same period of time, which has seen the bonnet height rise from 77 centimetres to 84. I don't know, David, whether or not this is a motoring phone-in or not. I think it's a selfishness phone-in. I think it's about people deciding that they don't care about other people's children. They only really care about, well, you tell me what. It's 11:18.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 11, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's not my finest hour, is it, when it comes to trying to articulate what I'm feeling? Because it's an almost incoherent but not irrational sense. And what I'm most confused by is why the story has disappeared. Do you know what I mean? It's the sense that it was once a really serious and major talking point, the proliferation of vehicles that rendered pedestrians much, much less safe. But not only has the story disappeared, more or less, the situation has got measurably worse. Judging by my inbox, and obviously the plural of anecdote is never data, there is still an enormous amount of negativity out there, but it is almost entirely absent from public discourse and media coverage. I don't believe, says Robert, that anyone buying a high-fronted SUV gives a second thought to pedestrians of any height. Not out of callousness, but it's because the vehicles are fashionable and a badge of wealth that drives the demand. It could be that, but I'm more with Keith, not that one, a different one. I hate them. Another thing is you can't see past them when you're alongside them at junctions. The proliferation is due to a vanity, effectively. 21 after 11 is the time. Phil's in Lancaster. Phil, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. You were asking why people don't talk about it anymore. And I think I can actually answer that one. I work as a consultant in the car industry, and I've been, up until the banking crisis, I was writing reports all the time for manufacturers saying, yeah, people are turning against them. Right. There is a big, big backlash. Banking crisis came along. Everybody lost interest in it. We were all about the economy. In this country then, we moved on.
Really?
Yeah, I genuinely
So it's
think
almost like fashion. It was like a fad of disapproval, and because I'm guilty of this. I can't sit here and start scoffing at people for being so whimsical that they suddenly stopped caring, because I think I'm part of the problem. I mean, it literally just the spotlight moved, and so did the public.
I think also, I mean, it was a green thing, but it was more of a case in Germany than it was in the UK. I think. Yeah, it was, and as I say, we all moved on. We had other things, and then by the time we'd come out of the economic straits, we were into a situation where we had the Dieselgate and then the whole electric car thing, and so the whole thing has moved on. Whether you should have petrol or diesel or hybrid or electric, that's what matters now. What it goes in, people just don't care about.
Well, I mean, again, the plural of anecdote is not data, but we've touched a bit of a nerve. I mean, my inbox is ticking along at a much higher rate than it usually does, but I mean, that is more probably as a consequence of me bringing it to their attention rather than something that's necessarily bubbling away in the background all the time. Why have they got higher, Phil? Why have they got even higher? I mean, they felt enormous before the banking crisis when we talked about it a lot, and now they're measurably higher than they were then.
Yeah, part of it is fashion. Part of it actually is down to electrification.
To what?
Electrification.
Oh, electrification. Do you need a bigger vehicle to accommodate an electric motor?
You need a higher one because usually the batteries are underneath the vehicle. I mean, there's no reason why the bonnet should be higher, but certainly the cars sit higher because the batteries are along the chassis. So it does tend to happen that you end up with a higher vehicle. And they've got bigger for a number of reasons. Cars are getting bigger, partly because of the safety regulations, which means that to get everything in, and partly also because the cost of the safety regulations and the electrification, etc., means that manufacturers are trying to make more. It costs them more to make them, so they're trying to make more margin on them. So they're putting more equipment in, so everything's getting bigger and better equipped. So as an industry, I think the car industry has just lost its way a lot in the last 5 years, and it's just gone down this rabbit hole of...
It shouldn't be happening here. I heard a really interesting interview the other day about the driverless cars that are now increasingly common on the streets of the United States, and it was prompted by reports that they're likely to happen here. But somebody pointed out that, you know, certainly big cities in the UK are medieval when it comes to their street layouts, and also that jaywalking is not illegal here. So you've got American towns are essentially drawn on graph paper. Everything's dead square, everything's straight, everything's clear. We shouldn't have these vehicles on our roads when you think about the simple relationship between space and size.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think there were driverless cars, I think, are a ridiculous thing. Having said that, I was in San Francisco a couple of months back, and they've got all the driverless, the Waymo taxis. Yeah. And actually, they seem to operate okay.
Well, it would in Los Angeles. Los Angeles was built for cars, but London wasn't. I'd like to see one find its way through Soho or through the sort of back streets of Birmingham. Thank you, Phil. I still sort of wonder whether there's been a triumph. I love that explanation with regard to the financial crisis, is that we just stopped caring. And I'm using the word "we" very honestly, because why did I suddenly stop caring about that? Is it because austerity kicked in? The coalition government came in. There just suddenly seems so much more to talk about. Brexit, of course, dominated our conversations from about 10 years ago onwards. And this one just dropped off the radar. But I cannot exaggerate how much I used to talk about this and how angry I used to get. I think it was during my sort of performatively provocative days. So I think I did rather relish finding the targets I could swing at with my full chest and almost enjoy how annoyed you would get with me or how offensive I would be about people who drove them. And obviously I'm not that person or I'm not that presenter anymore. But it was real. It was genuine disdain. And it just disappeared. And I still don't fully understand why. Grant's in Woking. Grant, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm still fairly angry.
I think I should be too. I think I should be too.
I think I phoned you last time you kind of spoke about this topic. Maybe it was about a year ago, and I ended up just being really irate and running off, and you cut me off because I think it was very appropriate to do so.
Well, don't do that again.
I'll try and withhold myself this time. I've been driving now for about 2 years, and I drive a small car, and I think I found myself getting more and more like kind of I can feel the less disdain coming through me because they are just so ubiquitous everywhere.
Yeah.
I drive in Surrey, the roads are tiny. I feel like, sometimes you're on the road and you feel like, an incident is going to happen. It's even worse in winter when they've got giant LED lights and they're blaring. Because the rise of the cars are so high, they will blare and blind you as they're coming around a corner. It's really dangerous, I feel. And, I'm surprised that more people aren't.
Well, in a way, you've explained why. I mean, it would feel a bit pointless objecting to it. It's like King Canute proving to his barons that he can't actually stop the waves from coming in. What's the point in objecting to something that's everywhere?
It is exactly that. I remember speaking. I think it is just they are so ubiquitous now. It's kind of that hyper-normalization, I think is the correct word here, where they have become so normalized that people no longer care. And it's not just SUVs; it's a thread through most problems in the world at the moment.
Me.
Yeah, where everything has just become so ubiquitous. There is that. I think the term is it's like a hyper crisis or something.
Isn't it funny that because you think of it as a status symbol, and a lot of people are obviously buying. I used to be quite rude about people with relatively modest houses and very expensive cars outside, but that was me being ignorant. I just didn't understand. You spend your money on whatever brings you the most pleasure. But the really huge status symbols are really low to the road, aren't they? The sort of Lamborghinis and the supercars are really low to the road, and yet this status symbol hinges upon being really high to the road.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fantastic video by a channel called Not Just Bikes on YouTube that I would thoroughly recommend looking at, and they go through all of the kind of it's mostly aimed at the States, but I think it's very applicable to the UK. Probably worse so because our roads are smaller, which you kind of already explained.
Yeah.
And he, the guy in the video there kind of just talks about how it got to this situation. And it's mostly through, big manufacturers. I think your previous caller was talking about that point where they've skirted around regulations, and that's just boiled over to the UK. My mum ended up getting an SUV a few years back, And she was just talking about how much safer it makes her feel.
How much safer she feels, and that's where the psychology kicks in. I feel safer, and I know that I am making the world I live in less safe, but I feel safer, and therefore I'm going to do it. And I don't think either of us are going to, certainly not about your mum, are going to be too rude about people in that mindset, because we've all got sort of variations of that mindset in different aspects of our life, various aspects of our life. We all care more about our own security or our loved one's security than we do about a stranger's security. But I guess it's the contempt that's attached to a stranger's security that I associate with these vehicles, and that has really weirdly dissipated over the last 10 years. And I hadn't even clocked it until today. In fact, I can't remember Grant ringing it. I can't remember talking about this a year ago. It must have been a slightly different conversation. It wouldn't just have been, ooh, SUVs, aren't they awful? But that's the kind of conversation I used to have and want to have again. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11. If you haven't seen them yourself, then trust me when I tell you that the scenes that are being broadcast from India now are absolutely horrifying. The scenes of the Air India plane crash described as devastating by the Indian government, the London-bound Air India plane crashing shortly after takeoff into a residential area in India. And as we have sort of cautiously suggested since the first footage emerged, I mean, it's highly unlikely that there's going to be anything but grim tidings as the story develops. And given that the story is going to develop while we are on air, I don't think it would be appropriate today to do Mystery Hour, not least because it's highly likely that I'll be bringing you details of the fate of the 242 passengers and 12 crew on board. And it would sound very strange if I were to bring you that information and those details in the midst of the rather frivolous conversation that we have traditionally between 12 and 1 on Thursdays. So rest assured of that. Alex Macheras is an aviation analyst and consultant, and it struck me that the type of aeroplane involved here is pertinent to the coverage. It's a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Alex, what can you tell us? I think I mispronounced your name as well. Sorry, Alex Macheras. What can you tell us about this aircraft? What do we know about it?
James, as you say, the 787, I think, is definitely going to be a focus point here, because we take for granted in aviation, thankfully, that we categorically have the safest form of transport. You are as safe as you are on a commercial airline aircraft as you are in an elevator. In fact, it's actually more risky in an elevator than an aircraft. So when something like what has happened today in Western India has started to unfold and becomes clear as to what has happened, when something like this happens, not only, of course, is it going to be extremely distressing for the loved ones of those on board. This was a packed long-haul aircraft with nationals from India, Britain, Portugal, Canada, and elsewhere. But also for the industry to be witnessing the first ever fatal accident of an aircraft with an impeccable safety record, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Just to put things into perspective, there are over 1,100 of these aircraft in service all over the world, including up and down the UK. It is arguably the modern-day workhorse of the long-haul skies, delivering great efficiency for airlines and a very comfortable experience for passengers. And it is why it is such a popular aircraft. And so with an aircraft of such an impeccable safety record, having never suffered a whole loss, and that's an industry term, meaning we've never lost a Dreamliner, a 787, it's never been involved in a fatal accident either, to have been involved in something as disturbing as what the footage surfacing online is beginning to reveal is quite unprecedented.
And I guess on a similar theme, it is already being reported that Boeing's share price has tumbled in extended trading following news of the crash. The company will be absolutely desperate to establish precisely what has happened here.
Absolutely. This initial period now, there are so many things going on. Of course, the priority of human lives is the search and rescue part, which is underway currently as we speak. But of course, all of the other stakeholders involved, the Indian Civil Aviation Authority, the airline, the states of those where there were citizens on board, but also Boeing and the US. Boeing will want to ascertain and to gain answers really quickly, if only to rule out, because the 787 is in service everywhere. Now, I know that LBC listeners are very in touch with what has happened globally in the news, and perhaps many will remember that Boeing have made several headlines over the last couple of years in relation to quality concerns. Most of that is pretty recent stuff to do with production of aircraft over the last year or two, and most of it is to do with a different aircraft type, the 737 MAX. But with Boeing not have been able to catch a break over the last few years, this is also going to be quite disturbing development for them to see an aircraft that has a proven safety record. This jet was around 11 years old, involved in such what looks like a catastrophic crash.
Although, if memory serves, there were reports in the States last year of a whistleblower alleging that parts of the 787 Dreamliner had been built in an unsafe manner. I think a mechanic at one of Boeing's contractors claimed that he'd witnessed holes being improperly drilled into the forward bulkheads. I mention it partly because a few of my listeners have reminded me of it, and because I'm just looking at the CNN report from June of 2024. Can we, at this stage, read anything at all into the flight data telling us that it was less than a minute after takeoff? The fact that something went so wrong so quickly, does that point to any possibilities more strongly than it would point to others, Alex?
I'll split the answer up into two, and as brief as I can. The first part would be that I would be more concerned over the link with recent quality concerns had this aircraft have been 1 or 2 years old and not 11 years old. Those recent concerns and why Boeing is under these different investigations, they've had leadership changes and whatnot, specifically on aircraft that are very, very new. This aircraft, along with so many globally, have been in service for well over a decade. And as I say, the safety record is stellar thus far. So there's that side. The other side is, in terms of reading into, when this happened, yes. James, there are two critical phases of the flight in air travel. They are known as critical phases of the flight. The cockpit is declared as sterile. It means that the only conversation said out loud is in relation to the work at play during takeoff and landing. Those are the two critical phases. What we've seen unfold is an aircraft struggling to gain altitude in a critical phase of the flight just seconds after departure. Why? The contributors, the parameters, what could have been at play, so many different possibilities. It would be inappropriate to go into them. But it has happened at a critical phase of the flight, just moments after takeoff, and that again is added concern.
11:40 is the time. Alex, you quite rightly reminded us at the outset that the safety of air travel is almost unparalleled when compared to other means of getting around the world or getting around your own country. As things stand, this will be one of the worst tragedies ever.
Yeah, I think we're looking at one of the worst in recent commercial aviation history, sadly, and I do that is because air travel is so safe globally. But as I say, if we were talking about a tired, aging, older aircraft, perhaps only in use in a specific area, requiring extra maintenance and complex weather and all that kind of stuff, I think there would be a bit more perspective in what we were looking at. I think the industry the execs that I've spoken with in the last 5 minutes at airlines all around the world are texting me in disbelief that this involves a 787 Dreamliner on what looks like a decent weather day in Western India.
That's absolutely fascinating, and I thank you for it. And as you say, it would be inappropriate at this point to speculate further, but it is clearly going to be more mysterious given the context that Alex has described than it would be in other circumstances with older, for example, planes. Alex Macheras, an aviation analyst and consultant, and as you gather, someone that's in constant contact with people in the highest echelons of this industry. 11:42 is the time. I'd got a message off a pilot who also works in training on the 787 Dreamliners, and I broke the habit of a lifetime and got the producer to ring him up. So Harry is in Oxford and joins me online now. What can you tell us, Harry? What is your reaction to what we know?
Yeah, hi James. First of all, my thoughts and prayers go out to all the victims and the families involved in this tragic accident today.
Absolutely.
But the reason I kind of felt obliged to call in was also to speak to you guys, was just to reassure listeners really about the safety of aviation and the amount of work that goes into what we do to make the actual industry as safe as possible. I've flown the 787 now for the last 8 years, and it is a phenomenal aeroplane. It has got so many layers of protection. It's such a safe aircraft, and it's an absolute dream to fly. It's not called the Dreamliner for any old reason, but certainly because it's also an absolute dream to fly. It is tragic that an accident like this can happen on a Dreamliner. It's also tragic that it can happen on any aircraft. I think more importantly, what we have to realise is that errors, mistakes, whatever it is that's contributed towards this accident can happen at any time, and people are only human. And that's kind of what I specialise in, really. It's what we refer to as human factors training. So it's identifying the fact that we are fallible, we do make mistakes. How can we mitigate against those mistakes, and how can we prevent incidents and accidents like this actually occurring? So it's quite tragic that something like this has actually happened.
And that would be in the arena of human error, which again is too early to speculate on. But we are, of course, also possibly looking at a mechanical failure or a technological failure.
Yeah, we are. And we kind of categorise these, to be honest, also within the realms of human error, because...
Okay, yes. Because someone should have spotted it. Yes, okay, I understand that. You don't have to answer this, because it's obviously I'm a little bit out of my depth on this element of the story. But the whistleblower last year that was reported in America warning of flaws in 787 planes having devastating consequences, was that something that gained much traction in your world, Harry?
Of course it is. When you think as long-haul pilots, we've got a lot of time to talk about issues, aviation. We just spend a lot of time considering what's gone on, especially within the factory. Ultimately, our lives are on the line as well, so we want the aircraft to be as safe as possible too. So these issues do, of course, concern us. What I would kind of talk about with regards to that is there is no single manufacturing process in the entire world which is flawless. So there is always room for mistakes to happen. What I can say, and what I know from Boeing as well, is that they will strive to do as much as they possibly can to iron out as many of these errors as they possibly can. We know about the history with the 737 MAX, and it does seem from those specific accidents that lots of lessons have been learned. Quality control is a big issue, and it should be a big issue, of course, but the 787 has an outstanding safety record, and any quality concerns that we ever flag up as individuals are treated very, very seriously and taken back to Boeing all the way to the top to be dealt with.
I hear you. A word, if you would, on the sense of community in your world. The collective response to something like this as it unfolds. Presumably you're in almost constant contact with each other.
Yeah, we are, and I'm sure, like your caller just before me, Alex, I'm sure his WhatsApp groups and his contact groups have been going absolutely haywire this morning. Primarily it's to do with the concern of the crew and their families, and of course the passengers. These are all innocent people who set out on a normal journey to go from A to B, and didn't expect it to end up as tragically as it has done. But what we also have to remember is that aviation isn't normal. Unfortunately, it is normalised as if we can just jump on an aeroplane every single day. But when you think about the complexities involved, it's actually quite a significant operation that requires highly skilled professionals to get it right every single time, including the engineers, the pilots, the flight crew, the cabin crew. So we do obviously discuss this quite a bit, and the solidarity is definitely out there with the crew and the passengers today, because none of us want to find ourselves in a situation similar to today's.
No, indeed, and I can only echo your concern and condolences for any families involved in this. Harry, thank you, and thank you also for offering to contribute to the programme over WhatsApp, because it is one of those moments where I have very little to add to what is being broadcast, but some people will of course be much better qualified to do so. 11:46 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We will continue to cover the crash of an Air India plane in Western India, less than a minute after takeoff. 242 passengers, including 53 British nationals and 12 members of staff on board. A couple of you I can see just tuning in and wanting a recap or an update on the basic details of what is unfolding. It's a London-bound plane. The images, Sir Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, has said in the last few minutes are devastating, and if whether you can see them yourself or not, you can take my word for it that the images are absolutely horrific and render it highly unlikely, if not impossible, that anybody could have survived this crash into a residential area as well. So as officials try to ascertain what has happened, it has to be considered that injuries and casualties and perhaps even deaths will extend beyond the people who were actually on the plane. But as I say, absolutely guaranteed that we'll bring you all of the details and developments on this as they happen. It's 11:48.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:51 is the time. Almost every subject under the sun feels a little light in the context of the unfolding tragedy in India. That, if you're just joining us, is why we won't be doing Mystery Hour today. But I mention it because we will conduct normal phone-ins, as it were, punctuated by news from India, where, as you will probably be aware by now, a Boeing 787 has crashed shortly after takeoff with 53 British nationals among the passengers on board. 11:52 is the time. And again, I'm in that really weird space of not knowing any more than you know in the moment until something happens, which I then have the duty of conveying to you as quickly as I possibly can. But I would warn you that it is almost certain to be very, very bad news, very, very grim tidings that will emerge at various points throughout throughout today and quite possibly tomorrow. It is 11:52. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Back to this question of SUVs, vehicles that render children invisible to drivers. And I think on a different day, I probably would have gone in further now on this psychology of the attraction. What is it that is so attractive about it? I understand the idea of being above the fray on the track. You feel insulated, and yet some of us don't feel it at all. Some of us would never dream of driving one of these vehicles because they seem so obnoxious and because we know that they are potentially so dangerous. Why? Why do you want to be up so high? And what's wrong with, well, who's got the problem? The people who find it repellent or the people who find it irresistible? 11:53 is the time. Fiona is in Arrington in Cambridgeshire. Fiona, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Well, as someone who's not even 5 foot tall, it's not just the little kids who are a bit worried.
Yeah.
It's me. But I do see the need in wanting to feel, the comfort in wanting to feel higher up, especially with being such a short person. But I can't reach the pedals and see over the steering wheel at the same time. So
what do you do?
I find these... I've got a Picanto.
Right, just get a tiny little car is what you had to do. Okay, fair enough.
And I do the small school run in my tiny little car, and I say to my son, "You can in a Picanto because I can get through all the little gaps and all the little bits, all places that all the other big cars can't get through." But my friend has got one of these big cars, and I can see, some of the seductive qualities of the interior.
Really? So it's just luxurious, as it were, compared to your little thing.
No, not a little thing.
Have you got ashtrays? Have you got electric windows?
Yes, I've got electric windows. I've got heated seats.
Woo!
I've got a heated steering wheel. Yeah, I've got air conditioning.
What's the point of a heated steering wheel? Is it just cold hands?
Yeah.
I've never heard of that before. This is why I never do motoring phone-ins. I don't know anything at all. But go on, tell me about the seductive nature of your friend's vehicle.
Yeah, she took me. I was really ill, and she took me to hospital in it, and she had to recline me quite a long way because I was really, really ill, and it was just so. If you were going on a longer journey and things like that, I could see why it was going to be so much more comfortable in that respect. But for day to day, getting it out and about, I see other people on the car park at school just really, really struggling to park their absolutely enormous
It is strange.
cars.
This is what I was trying to drive at with the psychology of it, is that it doesn't really make sense, except insofar as that thing you've just described, that sense of luxury, And superiority and safety trumps everything else. So, it's a nightmare to navigate, it's a nightmare to park, it's a nightmare for pedestrian safety, but none of that matters. All of that gets overshadowed somehow by the things you've just described, by the feelings you've just described.
Yeah, but as somebody who's driven motorbikes as well, you
don't need to reach the pedals on a motorbike, do you?
No, it's but it's one of those things. The thing is, when you're in that car, those cars, you are in another world. Yeah. It takes you out of touch with the road, and you do see these circumstances where, because you're so out of touch with the road, you forget about the conditions outside on the road for the road users and also for the pedestrians as well, and it just sometimes, and cyclists, and sometimes I think that can be dangerous because you actually forget about the real conditions when you see them zooming along on the motorway without a care in the world, and you think, there's
well, I get it. And then there it is.
Conducive to the weather.
Sam in Nottingham's got a friend who gets a cement mixer in the back of his Picanto. If you're ever, looking to branch out, Fiona, or
yeah, well, you'd be amazed what you can get in a Picanto. Honestly, I say to my son, you can in a Picanto. So,
while I have you, there's a story in the news today about short man syndrome. It's a key driver of male behaviour, apparently. Shorter men really are jealous of taller counterparts, making them more competitive. And one of their main causes of dismay is the idea that the opposite sex is less attracted to shorter men. Is there a female equivalent of short man syndrome, Fiona?
Yes.
Is there?
Yes.
Oh.
Well, I don't think in terms of attractiveness, because men don't seem to be too worried too much by short women, as far as I can tell.
No.
But you can get short, angry women. I'm one of them, I think.
You don't sound very angry. You sound absolutely charming. 300 adults surveyed. Shorter men were more likely to display envy, jealousy and competitiveness than their taller counterparts.
Yeah. It's competition. But as a small woman, you see, if men tend to prefer a woman not to be bigger than them because they feel a bit threatened. I mean, I've got quite a large pool to choose from being so short. So it's great for me.
Thank you. Yes.
The kind of flight or fight thing that goes with, you either become a shrinking violet, get ignored, or you stand and fight.
I guess so.
And so that's probably where the short, angry woman bit comes from.
Well, I don't know if it's an academically recognised syndrome in the way that short man syndrome is, but you certainly don't sound angry to me. That's probably my fault. I'm probably not doing my job very well. We get lots of angry people on the phone. It is coming up to 11:59. Thank you, Fiona. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Squeeze in one more on this and then head towards the news. If there's time, RJ's in Dartford. I can give you a minute, RJ. You better use it well.
Okay, yeah, I can summarise it.
So this is
quickly.
RJ on SUV. ASAP, PDQ.
Yep. So essentially, I think part of the reason is psychology isn't just on the buyer side, it's on the manufacturer side as well. And I was just looking at, so I picked 10 car brands, looked through their websites, just go to their website. The first thing it shows you is always an SUV.
Is it?
Yeah. So, I don't know if I can say manufacturer names on the radio, whether there's a problem with that. But Ford makes 11 cars. 2 of them aren't SUVs.
Right.
BMW, you go to their page, the first thing it shows you is a giant SUV. Ford, Dacia, Volvo. I had to go to Ferrari as the first manufacturer who won't show you an SUV as the first car. And I think that's part of the reason people buy them nowadays, is that
that's what you're being offered. So it's like pick a card, any card, and then you always pick the one that the magician wants you to pick.
Yeah, I think part of it is just people don't consider when they buy these cars the impact they have on sort of pedestrians, the planet, the road surface, all of those things. They go to a car manufacturer and they're prompted to buy this
so that's what the manufacturers want. So we've done it from a bit of a chicken and egg angle. Why is everybody driving these vehicles? Because that's what's being foisted upon them. It's kind of what the first caller, Phil, touched upon. It's the way that the industry has directed the consumer. RJ, thank you for bringing it in on time. I do have reservoirs of amusement at the idea of some of the texts that are sent to the programme being taken out of context. So if some people now listen on catch-up, so they forget it's not live, and they'll send me a message that's relevant to something I said 90 minutes ago, and I'll read it 90 minutes later and think, what the heck is going on there? So here's a couple of classics before we head towards the news. Christina's been in touch to say, that's just like me, James. I'm super short, and I'm inexplicably an aggressive little pit bull. Thanks for keeping us in the loop there, Christina. And Phil, slightly more interestingly, has been in touch to say, and this is it, word for word, the entire message, good morning, James. I find short ladies very attractive. Well, again, Phil, thanks for keeping us in the loop.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 12. Philip and Sheena have been in touch to remind me that there was a missed information yesterday that I forgot to share with you. Or actually, I didn't forget. I ran out of time. So you're absolutely right. I can share that with you today. If you're just tuning in, and I know some people do, although not as many as I sometimes pretend, because you only tune in for Mystery Hour, then we're not doing it today because it would be rather inappropriate to bring you updates on the crashed flight in India amidst the usual frivolity that typifies Mystery Hour of a Thursday afternoon. And it is back to India we go now with Fraser Knight. In Thomas's bulletin there, one of the contributors describing the footage that is being shared online, it's very much part of the modern world, isn't it? But at least in this context, it isn't fake news. These are films made by people in the area, quite a hard area to get to for journalists based in Delhi, for example, which is hours away. What have you seen, Fraser? What kind of footage is being shared?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, over the past few hours, journalists all over the world have been trying to verify some of these images. So the ones that we know are from the area are just scenes of devastation, James. You know, at first it was videos of big black plumes of smoke, and then there was videos of the plane itself actually crashing. We saw a huge fireball coming from that, and now it's the aftermath, which is, you know, a building that looks to be like really seriously damaged. You've got debris everywhere. There's smoke still billowing out. You've got firefighters with hoses. You've got huge crowds of people who are coming to try and help to rescue some of the injured who are trapped in the rubble. I mean, there are bits of plane sort of scattered around the place. There are, as I say, the sort of buildings that it looks like this plane has gone into. I've just seen one crash up now with the tail of the plane hanging out the side of one of the buildings. It really is devastating, and it just shows you the sort of scale of this. And in the past sort of half an hour, we have had confirmed that there have been at least 30 bodies recovered from the rubble there, and rescuers are still trying to focus on getting some of the injured out of there. We heard India's health minister saying many people have been killed, and a reminder that there were at least, well, there were 53 British nationals on board that plane, 169 Indian nationals, 1 Canadian, 7 Portuguese, and reports that among them were 11 children. So huge, you know, terrible scenes of devastation in what happened in just a few minutes after takeoff. The plane coming down within 5 minutes, having lost signal with air traffic control in under a minute after taking off from Ahmedabad airport in Western India.
As you say, the breakdown of the people on board makes it even more relevant, of course, to people listening in this country. Has our Foreign Office put out a number yet of that can be contacted?
It has, yes. The Foreign Secretary David Lammy has been saying that they are working with authorities in India to try and piece together the facts and to try and to offer support where they can. And as I say, 53 British people on that plane. They've put out a number for people to contact the Foreign Office if they are concerned. And I'll give it to you just now. It's 0207 008 5000. 0207 008 5000. And a reminder, this was a plane that left Ahmedabad airport. It was an Air India flight AI-171 heading for London Gatwick Airport, and Gatwick Airport saying that it was due to land there at 6:25 p.m. this evening.
And also among the footage that is popping up in front of us, volunteers, just ordinary people on the ground trying to help, trying to get involved, and trying to, no doubt, exposing themselves to some risk as well. But the chaos is really the only word that you can use to describe unfolding at the moment.
You can feel the chaos from the images that are coming out, and also just the amount of, as you can imagine, the amount of smoke and debris and dust that's being blown up. I mean, a lot of the pictures I've seen, you're not seeing very, very far in front of yourself when you're right in amongst the rubble. And I mean, crowds, certainly in the images I've seen of, 50, 100 to 150 people, all there kind of gathered round, of some of them clearly looking in shock, but others just wanting to try and help. There are so many people. I mean, that's 242 people on board, and also crashing into, what is a residential area, Magani Nagar, just outside the perimeter of that airport. Some reports that the building the plane has gone into was a doctor's hostel.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And so people just trying to focus on getting any of the survivors out.
And of course, when we talk about casualties or even deaths, it will be some time before anybody can determine whether or not these are people who were on the plane, or whether or not these were people who were in buildings or in the environs where the crash occurred.
Yeah, exactly. It will take some time to piece that together. What we know, though, was 242 on board, 12 of them crew members. So there were 2 pilots on board and 10 crew members. But yeah, there will have been a number of people around that residential area where clearly, now there are stretchers being wheeled through hospitals. There's cameras outside the hospitals there as well. And stories coming through very slowly too as well of people who were in the area when the crash happened. One person sort of saying that her son had just gone into the doctor's hostel for a lunch break when the plane crashed, and she says he jumped from the 2nd floor window and suffered injuries, but is safe. So, we're going to hear more and more of these stories of, how this unfolded. But yeah, the Foreign Office, I'll just read that number one more time in case anyone missed it. 0207 008 5000 for anyone who has concerns and wants to be kept updated.
Fraser, thank you, and thank you in advance for any forthcoming updates that will no doubt be unfolding throughout the day. If you are just tuning in, and I have to be conscious that people will be, then it's my sad duty to inform you that an Air India plane crashed shortly after takeoff this morning with 242 people on board. It was bound for London Gatwick Airport, and there were 53 British people among that passenger total, 12 members of crew as well. The footage that Fraser has just been describing, and which is now sort of gathering momentum, if you like. There's more and more of it now emerging, because of course everybody walks around with a camera in their pocket these days. Is absolutely hideous. I mean, absolutely harrowing. Images of parts of the aircraft apparently embedded in the side of a building that is now being widely reported as being a student doctor, a medic hostel, a hostel for student doctors. And as Fraser just told us, reports also now coming in of people escaping from the locus of the crash, people who were on the ground when the plane hit, as opposed to the original focus of concern, which would have been the people who were on the plane in the first place. And that number, once again, if you are concerned about people who were on this plane, London bound, Air India from Ahmedabad, then the number is 0207 008 5000. It's coming up to 12:13. Fraser, thank you. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A few of you, I can't listen. I can't. I know. I don't. I trust you, obviously, and I appreciate some people listening to this program will have better connections in India in general, or in Ahmedabad in particular, than I do. But I'm going to have to double or triple check anything that you send to me. I'm certainly not going to be able to read it out unchecked or unconfirmed. But it is the nature of the modern world that the information that will be coming out of that corner of the world will be reaching you sometimes even before it reaches professional journalists or before it reaches professional news organisations. As Richard says, this video footage is truly terrifying, and the temptation, of course, is to look away. We also have the business of a normal radio programme to conduct together, which means we move into new territory now, and I think I'm going to lean towards the interesting but less serious topics. I'm not doing mystery hour for fairly obvious reasons, but after the next break we will turn our attention to a new phone-in topic. We will leave the SUVs behind and move instead from, this is quite good, from hybrid vehicles to hybrid working.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:15. I probably should. It's probably a little bit niche, isn't it? My pontifications upon why some topics have dropped off our collective radar and why other topics come round again. That's not really what you're tuning in for. You're just tuning in for the content, not for the thinking behind the content. But it was odd, wasn't it, when hybrid working became a thing during the lockdown, or at least home working most obviously became a big thing during the lockdown, how upset some people got about it. I was truly puzzled for a while by the vitriol that was directed at people who elected to work from home. All sorts of lies told. The idea that you can't do a proper shift if you're working from home. And I guess it was down to two things. It was down to the kind of journalists that exist exclusively to service the interests of wealth. So wealth in this case being landlords, commercial landlords and the like, who hated the idea of losing money. And a certain type of journalist is never busier than when trying to defend the interests of wealth, even when it goes against the interests of their readers or their viewers or their listeners. So that would have been a large part of the vitriol that was directed at home workers in particular and home working in general. And the other bit, if we were to be more generous, was probably just a little bit of change resistance. Oh, that's a bit different from how I've always done things, therefore it must be suspect. I think we all suffer from that sometimes, don't we? Oh, well, we didn't do things like that in my day, therefore it must be dodgy. And sometimes it can be very serious, for example, with neurodiversity and special educational needs. So you get the kind of humbug saying things like, oh, we just called it naughty in my day, or it was just lazy when I was a lad. And it can be less serious when you sort of think that video games are going to bring about the end of civilization as we know it, when it was actually social media all along that was posing the greatest threat to young people. So I kind of get why it caused problems. I got two stories in front of me today that have come pretty much in the same window. They've appeared at more or less the same time. City firms are ordering workers back to the office. UBS has told its UK employees that they must be in on either Mondays or Fridays or both. They have a sort of mandated 3 days in the office. The stockbroker Panmure Liberum has joined Deutsche Bank in telling you can't work from home on consecutive Mondays and Fridays. So you can't do the kind of 4-day weekend anymore. I don't know why that is, but I do know that it is increasingly common. 5 days in the office at Santander is now the default option. More and more employers are increasing the number of mandatory days in the office since the introduction of hybrid working. A return, but I don't think a permanent return to pre-pandemic working patterns, which challenges in some cases. I can't tell you the acronym they use to describe the phrase that is used to describe people who only come into the office on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays. I can tell you what, and I can't say it I can't, can I? It's in the Financial Times. Can I not just read the stuff out of the Financial Times? They're not regulated by Ofcom. You're absolutely right. So I can't use the acronym that is used by bankers to describe workers who only come into the office on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays. But there must be a perception, or indeed a reality, that if you've got Saturday and Sunday off and you're going to work from home on Friday and Monday, then you're having a bit of a laugh. You're swinging a bit of a lead. So that's story number one. Story number two almost swims in the opposite direction. This is about how working from home or hybrid working has become a new normal for white-collar professionals who really relish the ability to split time between working from home and the office. There's a problem here. The more educated and highly paid you are, the more likely you are to be hybrid working. Younger and older workers in deprived areas are less likely to do so. That will have a lot to do with the nature of the work that you're doing. Some jobs obviously can't be done remotely. Anything that's customer facing or anything that involves human interaction on a physical level rather than simply a vocal or a verbal one is going to demand that you're there. But it's interesting, isn't it, that the proportion of workers engaged in hybrid work gets higher in higher income bands and even in more affluent areas than it does with people in deprived regions. I do wonder how much of it might have to do with how pleasant your home is. as a younger person in a shared house or in a shared flat, I don't think I'd want to work from home. But when we were during lockdown, I don't even live in that house anymore, but I had a lovely massive luxury shed at the bottom of my garden. It was quite pleasurable to stroll up the garden in my slippers at 10 to 10 in the morning and assume the position behind the microphone. Weird, I mean really weird, to do this job in a shed on your own. I mean, it might not be the most wonderful view in the world, but I can see Keith every day, every time I look up. And Eleanor is always smiling and waving cheerily at me through the glass. And even though it's an oddly solitary job, it was never as solitary as it was when I was literally in a shed 10 miles away from my colleagues, talking into a microphone that I didn't know you could hear. I couldn't know for certain that you could hear what I was saying. And sometimes the comms would go down. So I wouldn't see the text. I wouldn't even see the text saying, I can't hear you anymore. So I'd be there in this weird liminal space, this sort of strange, I don't know what you'd call it. It's like an alternative universe when there were times, did you know this? Have I told you this before? There were times when I was talking and you couldn't hear me. And I didn't know. Because they couldn't contact me. Even my phone signal sometimes was a bit sporadic. And I remember the time I complained to engineering about some weird squeaking in my earphones, a weird squeaking noise, and it turned out it was our next door neighbours on their trampoline. So it was a weird period for me, and one that was never going to become the new normal. And that's why I find the subject quite interesting. The notion that it has become the new normal for white-collar professionals. So what's the question here? Well, I think I want to know what it's like. I remember some attempts to whip up resentment. Kind of people who normally don't have anything nice to say about train drivers, except horrible things about how disgusting it is that they earn a decent scratch in this country, suddenly deeply concerned about train drivers because they wouldn't be able to work from home. It's just wherever you can find a wedge, wherever you can stick a wedge between people, then they will do so. But I've never come across any resentment of this. I don't even know whether it exists. So I've got two questions for you. And remember that we're keeping a very close eye on developments in India. So it is going to have a strange rhythm to it, the rest of this programme. But it's important that we do both, keep the programme moving in a traditional way while also properly reflecting and reporting on any developments in the tail of the London-bound Air India plane that has crashed in Ahmedabad. The two questions I've got for you are how has it changed? And I quite like this phrase, the new normal. We're in danger of overusing it, but how has it changed the world in which you live as a consequence of hybrid working becoming the new normal? 0345 6060973. I want negatives as well. I've asked this question, a variation on this question before, and it was almost uniformly positive. But I want negatives as well. And what I'd also like, what the second question involves, is envy. Is there any? Do you actually think it's unfair that you can't work from home while other people can? Is there any, what would you call it? Is it almost class envy, status envy? You look at the money that you earn and the likelihood of whether or not you can do it, then there's an epic imbalance here that actually is a grounds for grievance. But I don't know that you can take the grievance out on the people who've got better circumstances than you because it's not their fault. But if you are on a smaller income, let's say up to £20,000, then you are massively less likely to be able to work from home or even to hybrid work, and yet you are travelling. You're paying a fortune. So the less you're on, the more money you're likely to be paying to actually get to work and back. I don't normally do grievance mining on this programme. I tend not to ask you to ring me and tell me why you've got beef with somebody you've never met. Do you see what I mean? It's not really something that lends itself to the conversations that we have together. But I'm going to make an exception today. I am really interested to know whether those slightly transparent attempts by client journalists serving the interests of wealth have worked, whether or not people do resent home workers. If you've got a blue collar and a white collar breakdown at your place of work, you've got people on the production line and you've got people in the office. The people on the production line can never work from home. The people in the office are now doing it as the new normal. Does it cause resentment? Does it cause any problems? Not least because the people on the production line are likely to be earning a bit less or a lot less than the people in the offices. So does hybrid working breed unhappiness in a workforce or even in a family? 0345 6060 973. What has it done to your life? That in some ways is the most important question. What has it actually done to your life, for good or for ill? Although I suspect it's more likely to be for good. 0345 6060 973. And then the question I haven't asked you before: what made you change your mind? Why have you changed your mind? I suspect the mind changer is most likely to be from thinking it was a good idea to thinking it was a bad idea. But it could have gone the other way. When it first came out, you thought, why would anyone want to work from home? Or as a boss, you thought, I don't want them working from home. They're lazy, no-good layabouts. They'll be swinging their lead like there's no tomorrow. I need them in the office so I can crack the whip and check up on them and keep a close eye on what it is that they're doing. But you've changed your mind. Or vice versa. When it first came in, you thought, this is wonderful. This is the brave new world. This is the future. This is such a lovely opportunity. Not only am I going to have a happier workforce, I'm going to save a fortune on rent. And now you've changed your mind as well. So actually, let's turn it upside down. Let's start with that question. Why have you changed your mind about this? As it becomes the new normal, why have you moved from I love it to I hate it, or from I hate it to I love it? 0345 6060 973. And then you've got the change it's made in your world, the change it has made to your life, which I suspect is going to be positive, but my door is open for the negative, as it always is. And then the thing I don't think I'll get, but which I won't stop asking for, which is the envy. Has it bred unhappiness? Has it bred any envy among the population? 12:27 is the time. Steve's been in touch. He says, if I worked from home, James, I'd never get anything done. Then again, I am a plumber. Well, you say that, Steve. I wonder what the plumbing's like in your gaff. Because I bet you can't be bothered to do it, can you? If you need a job doing, it would be like bringing your work home with you. Quite often the case. The people who work in the sector are the least likely to be doing the little jobs around their own house that need doing. But those are the three questions I've got for you. Why have you changed your mind about this? 0345 6. Lots of people making the same joke now. Jordan's been in touch. I'd love it, James, the opportunity to work from home. However, as a lorry driver, I fear I wouldn't get away with it. But what I'd like to know from both of you is whether you feel... and Tim's a window cleaner. All right, keep them coming. We've got a window cleaner, a lorry driver and a plumber walk into a pub. Sounds like the first line of a joke, but I grant you. But what you're doing is making quite good jokes. You're not sounding as if you really envy the people who can work from home. I want to know whether that phenomenon, whether that sentiment exists. I want to know why you've changed your mind, and I want to know how it's changed your life, for good or for ill. But as I say, I suspect probably for good. It's coming up to 12:29. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. On a much more serious note, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has said that his thoughts are with the passengers and families of those on the Air India flight bound for Gatwick, which crashed in Ahmedabad in Western India earlier this morning. He said the scenes emerging of a London-bound plane carrying many British nationals crashing in the Indian city of Ahmedabad are devastating. I am being kept updated as the situation develops, and my thoughts are with the passengers and their families at this deeply distressing time. I would add to that, and as I'm sure Downing Street will do or have done, that the condolences are almost certain to extend to people and families who were on the ground in the area where the plane hit. I don't think anybody's expecting casualties to be confined to the passengers or crew who were on board the plane. But I would tell you something. I hope this doesn't have the opposite effect of what I intend. But people send me stuff as they discover it on social media. And some of the footage emerging now is hideous. I would caution you to stay away from that, personally. I'd stay off Twitter if I were you, for two reasons. Number one, you can't unsee things. And number two, neither can you guarantee that what you are seeing is real. So just stick with us, stick with LBC, and keep an eye on the LBC app. Stay tuned to the radio station. We'll bring you all the information that you need. I promise you that. And I would just cautiously advise you to stay away from the, shall we say, the less salubrious social media sites. 12:30 is the time. Tim Humphrey has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:33. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Chris says, have you forgotten the missing word again? I haven't done a missing word today. I've got a missed information for you that I shall do before 1 o'clock. If you're just tuning in, hoping to catch the second half of Mystery Hour, you'll understand why we're not doing it today. The flight, a Air India flight, which departed from Ahmedabad in Western India, carrying 240 passengers earlier this morning and crashed very shortly afterwards, remains the focus of our coverage. But there is an attendant or an alongside phone-in about the new normal, about the changes that hybrid working or working from home has made to your life, and possibly even more interestingly, for me at least, the question of why you've changed your mind about it. I haven't. I'm a great believer in the old adage that there's no point having a mind if you never change it. But I haven't changed my mind on this. Maybe I need to. Maybe it's not the unalloyed good I've always thought that it must be. Nicola is in Rickmansworth. Nicola, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
So I've been home working now for about 4.5 years, and I absolutely love it. It's, I can't complain. I now get to do more exercise. I spend less time in the car. I see my parents more. It comes with so many benefits, and I literally wouldn't change it for the world.
What if they made you? Well, I mean, because some people are, saying if they made me come back to the office, I'd change job. I'd find a job where I didn't have to.
So interestingly, I did. So it wasn't the reason I did, but I now work for myself as a consultant, but I spend time in the office, and I do miss the social interaction. Right. But generally, the benefits far outweigh the negatives. The thing that I thought was really when I reflect on it, and it's something I've reflected on recently, is the impact that it has on the children. So it's been amazing. I felt like I got maternity leave when I first went working from home. Got to know the kids again. Got to make them homemade dinners.
Do you still like them?
I still like them.
That's a relief.
I mean, they're a bit older now than they were 5 years ago. What's changed for me with the kids is they know I'm always here. And I think it's led to less accountability, less responsibility and independence. So it's like, I forgot my PE kit. Oh, here's my mum. I'll just call my mum. She's always at home. And so for me, that's the one thing that I feel like they don't really get the full grasp on what it is to be full-time working, even though I'm full-time working.
How old are they?
12 and 14.
That's all right, isn't it, for now? I'd go forget the PE kit, Mum will sort it out. I mean, if you'd said 24 and 22, then we'd probably have a problem.
That's true. But when I was their age, if you forgot your home economics or your PE kit, then it was tough, and it helps you to remember. So
it does. No, I mean, it's a fairly small fly in the otherwise rather lovely ointment. Do you encounter any envy? Do people get the hump about the freedoms that you're enjoying? Because the big thing is the commute, I think, isn't it? You sort of. I spend 2 hours a day commuting, and I barely notice it because between you and me, Nicola, I don't work that many hours of a weekday. But if I did, then having an hour at the beginning and an hour at the end of the day would really eat into my time. Most notably, my time with young children when I had them.
Absolutely. Yeah, that to me is 100% the best thing that happened, really, for working from home.
And does anyone get the hump? Do you encounter any envy or negativity?
Never.
No, I don't think it's worked that,
I think, if I think back to when I went back to work, so I worked full-time for 10 years with a young family, and I was mildly envious of my friends who didn't go back to work full-time, but that was more just me seeing that I just, being so time poor and scraping every hour with the kids that I could find. But that's just your own personal circumstance. I don't think you feel envious or
no, I don't either. I mean, and to be fair, the article that I'm referring to simply describes statistical likelihood. It doesn't actually detail any bitterness or envy. I just remember a couple of commentators trying to sow the seeds of unhappiness or envy, often by talking about train drivers for some reason. But I said, well, they can't work from home, so why should anyone? Which is such an illogical position to adopt. Here's somebody who can't do something, therefore why should people who can do it? But I like that, and I wonder how many families have been strengthened by that simple presence, and also clocking. I think that's what I clocked most was the sheer scale, the size of the bite that a commute takes out of your of your day. I've got a former air traffic controller joining me shortly to discuss some elements of what has happened in India. And rest assured that LBC will be staying with this story throughout the day. It's also quite a good time to discover our app if you haven't already. The LBC app will be providing absolutely definitive coverage of this plane crash and of any developments in the area. A plane, of course, that was due to arrive at Gatwick Airport in London this evening, and you can find the LBC app wherever you get your apps, but download it for free, and it gives you all sorts of opportunities to not just listen to the radio and podcasts, but also to follow the coverage being provided by our excellent colleagues in the newsroom itself. 12:38 is the time. Back to hybrid working, which I suppose is one of those things that an air traffic controller could never do. Alongside, what have we got so far? The lorry driver, the plumber, and what was the other one? And the window cleaner. Lewis is in Stourbridge. Lewis, what would you like to say?
James, mate, I would like to say that last call I got is spot on, because the work from home opened up the whole world of opportunity regarding kids and childcare.
That's nice.
And just being there in their lives, you know.
And we didn't know. You don't know what you've got till it's gone, as Joni Mitchell famously said, but you don't know what you haven't got until you've got it. It'd be the opposite way around. So you didn't even realise when you were going to work normally that you were missing out on stuff potentially, because you didn't know you were missing out on it until you actually got it. Am I right?
Yeah, I suppose. But, you know, my dad works all the time on sites, and he's not there in the childhood, but I'm there for my kids now. That's one pro anyway, but that's a pro for me. The pros for the employer are far more good as well, equally.
Why? What do they get out of? What do you do, and why does your employer benefit from you being at home?
Well, I was office based 9 to 5, 5 days a week, and now I'm at home 5 days a week. The employer is getting me any time that I can choose immediately, so I can not wait till the next day to go to the office. I can do it at home. And people that need it, you know, I'm there.
Any envy? You come across any negativity?
I get over it a bit in a way. You know, pros and cons in it of being the employment you got.
Yeah, but does anyone resent you having the freedoms that you've described?
Not necessarily, not really.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. Ian's got some colleagues who get. Well, he was the bitter colleague, because he'd be schlepping into the office during 30-degree heat, and he'd have colleagues at home contributing to Zoom meetings while sitting in their gardens in shorts and t-shirts. But you'd get over that pretty quickly. And would you ever go back if I offered you, I don't know, $5,000 a year more to go back to the office for 5 days a week? Would it be a tough decision?
It'll be easy. I'd say not for that. $10,000 at least, I reckon.
Well, I wasn't going to haggle. I was not in a position to haggle. But it is interesting, isn't it? How quickly. I wonder what other things would happen that we just never considered the alternative to. You know, why do we do things like this? Because we always have, and therefore we always will. And until something like the pandemic comes along, you never really question whether or not it's the best way of doing things. Some people were nibbling at the edges of home working or hybrid working before the pandemic kicked in, but it wasn't a major topic of conversation because it wasn't a major employment issue, and then it became necessary. It was it was kind of thrust upon us, and it became normal so quickly in ways that it could never have done if it had been left to sort of evolve naturally, if it had never been necessitated by circumstance. And then people like Lewis discover that actually this is a million times better than the way we used to do things, and the way we would still be doing things if it wasn't for the pandemic. I would like to find a little bit more bitterness. I've only got Bitter Ian. That's his name for himself. I'm not being rude, in Essex. Talking about having to work from home. Two colleagues couldn't come in during lockdown, James. One was asthmatic and one was overweight. There was nothing quite like having to commute into the office in 30-degree heat while watching them on Zoom sitting in their gardens in shorts and T-shirts. There's some little clips, aren't there, on social as well, of people who've accidentally turned their camera on to reveal that they're sitting on the beach or something like that, and then very quickly turned it off again, but too late. Get you into quite a lot of trouble, I imagine. Colin's in Liverpool. Colin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Great to speak to you.
Likewise.
First time, long time, first time.
Well done.
So I was an early adopter with the work from home thing about nearly a decade ago.
So, you said I had to do. My brain was a little bit behind your mouth. Then you said an early adopter. I thought you said I was nearly a doctor. How can you be nearly a doctor with working from home? But an early adopter. Carry on.
Difficult. Early adopter. I was working in London, in the city of London, and kind of hating the daily schlep and the commute.
Yeah.
And I met my current wife, and she was living up near Liverpool. And I thought, I used to travel up every weekend, and I got tired of that. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to pack my bags and move up to Liverpool. And I just did that.
And you can just do the job remotely.
I wasn't strictly allowed to do it, but I did it, and then asked for forgiveness. And they said, well, you shouldn't have done that, but now that you're there, just...
really? And you're working in finance, so all you need is a computer terminal?
No, I'm in software and security, so I'm a security software consultant.
Oh, so again, all you need is computer access, really?
Absolutely. So I've been, and then I perfected the working from home spiel. I got all the equipment, I set up a home office, and then, of course, the pandemic hit, and, I was ahead of the curve there, and I've done it ever since, and I'd absolutely never go back to an office job.
I'm struck by the thought that you did it before it was thrust upon us, but you would still be in a tiny minority had it not been for the pandemic. People simply wouldn't have done it. Do you get lonely at all?
No, I don't, and I hear a lot of negativity about that isolation aspect, and that you don't get to meet people, and I actually meet people from all around the world. I'm working at the moment with an American company, colleagues in India. I've just been chatting about this dreadful news this morning with them. People in Amsterdam and the Netherlands. I've met people from all around the world, and I still have connections with them, people that I've never met. And then I'm going over in a month's time to visit my colleagues who I've been working with for 2 years in Amsterdam. So I actually see it's opened up my world to me. As far as the loneliness at home, I've got nearer my family. I can take the dog for a walk anytime I want. I can meet mates in the pub after work.
That's all going on. You must be better off as well. I was going to say, you must be quite a bit better off as well, because not only the commute savings, but also the difference in the cost of living between the southeast and the northwest.
Yeah, I think I worked out I almost quadrupled my disposable income by doing that switch.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
God.
Something like that.
Two things. First, a little word of advice, if I may, Colin. Don't ever say current wife again. just in case. You never know who's listening.
Well, I'm going to send her the clip later, and I might edit that one out.
I think I would. And the second is a very good joke from David, who also misheard you when you said you were an early adopter. Quite a few of us thought you said I was nearly a doctor, but David's got there with the punchline. He says, I was nearly a doctor, but I didn't have the patience. It's all going on today. Thank you, mate. Stay safe, Colin. It's 12:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:48. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Doug Maclean is a former controller at National Air Traffic Services, now the managing director of DKM Aviation Partners, and he joins me now. I must be sure to phrase this question correctly, Doug, but somebody with your background, somebody in your world, what are the early thoughts beyond epic sympathy and concern? What are the early thoughts that go through the mind of somebody like you when an event like the one we're reporting on in India reaches your ears?
Yeah, good morning, James. There is that tremendous sadness, and you're looking at, as you say, there's plenty of video evidence now of the aeroplane and various things that happened. So how on earth could this happen? What was happening? I think back to my own days sitting in a control tower and watching various incidents and things, and you can't really avoid it. You put yourself in a position of the controller who was probably watching and understanding the actions of the flight crew when it all happened.
And in the sort of context of the last few years, the type of aircraft involved and the speed with which the tragedy occurred after takeoff, where does this sit? I mean, is it close to unprecedented? An earlier contributor described how it's the first time this particular type of aircraft has ever been involved in this particular type of tragedy. That adds to the shock, I presume, on a professional level.
It does. I mean, I was on a 787 in January across the Atlantic, and they are lovely airplanes, and they are, really, really popular airplanes. There's over 1,100, I think, and they've flown 1 billion passengers around the world safely without any fatal accidents. Obviously, landing and taking off are the most significant times of any flight. So to have an accident within a short distance of the airport is, it's obviously one of the places it's going to happen, and you then wonder, well, what caused it? Apparent loss of power. The videos seem to show that the airplane got to a certain height, I believe around 500 feet, and then started to descend and crashed within probably a mile or so of the end of the runway.
Is there a uniformity internationally when it comes to the processes of investigation? Will the investigations being undertaken now be more or less the same wherever in the world something like this had taken place?
Yeah, this. I mean, it may sound slightly callous, but this will be a standard investigation, albeit for the individuals and families involved. There's nothing standard about this at all. Having the wreckage of the airplane so close to the airport, albeit it seems to have been in a densely populated area, the data recorders are going to be discovered, hopefully very soon. And those two data recorders will tell us an awful lot about the cause of this accident. There are two, and one of the both of them will be very, very important. The cockpit voice recorder doesn't just record voices, it records everything. It records the sounds that are happening. So if there were any alarms or alerts, or even they can even listen to the engine noise as heard from the cockpit, etc. So they will have a full understanding, and these people, the investigators, are hugely experienced in doing this. So they'll have a full understanding of what they were listening to and what the crew were saying to each other. Because I gather there was a mayday call made, and then apparent radio silence. Well, the radio silence is not unusual, because the crews generally work on the principle that you aviate, navigate, and then communicate. So you basically fly the airplane, you know where you're going, and when you have time during an emergency, you then communicate to other people. The temptation always, and we used to have to do this with our trainee controllers or young controllers, is don't speak to them unless they want to speak to you.
Got it.
They are fully occupied in trying to recover the situation with the airplane doing something which turned out to be fatal.
And that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? But, and again, this may not be a question you can answer, but what might be a realistic time scale for finding out fuller details of what's happened here? I mean, is there a rough expectation of how long the earliest stages of an investigation would take?
Assuming that they get the data recorders, and both of them are in very, very well protected shields, so the data should be recoverable from those recorders. Normally, within 30 days or so, you would get some sort of preliminary report to indicate what the investigation is thinking, and this will be a multinational investigation. Obviously, it's happened in India, but Boeing themselves, will obviously be, as the manufacturer, will be party to the investigation, and they may well bring in other people as well who have specific expertise in it, but that's all part of the same process, and that will happen very quickly. So within 30 days or so, we would have some sort of indication, and then the actual full report with all the technical details, and the final cause probably will take much longer, 6 months, 9 months, or a year or so. But what Boeing and all the regulators will be very keen to do is to reassure the public that although this is a tragic accident, there are still over 1,100 of these airplanes flying safely every single day. And, unless there's any suggestion that there's a fleet-wide thing, and that would be so unusual, then these airplanes will still continue to fly very safely across the world.
Thank you. Doug Maclean, a former controller at National Air Traffic Services and now the Managing Director of DKM Aviation Partners, providing some very helpful insights into some elements of this story. I can provide some others. Police in Ahmedabad are reporting that more than 100 bodies have been brought to a hospital in the area. This follows the crash earlier today of a plane heading towards Gatwick Airport from that city in Western India, with 53 Britons among the 242 passengers and 12 crew on board. And as Doug explained, the plane is understood to have descended within seconds of takeoff, that Mayday message being received. And then, as we now understand better than we did before we spoke to Doug, further conversation not taking place, but we mustn't read too much into that or speculate unduly on what any elements as they emerge may mean. That's why I wanted to know from Doug what the realistic timescale might be on finding out more about what has happened. I would tell you that the footage that began to spread fairly swiftly afterwards was and remains harrowing, absolutely hideous, about as bad as you could imagine in the context of a plane coming down in a residential area. But we'll be staying with this story throughout the rest of the day on LBC, and also, of course, on the LBC app, where there is a crack team of reporters working constantly to bring things to your attention as soon as they are observed. And that's more or less it for today. I don't think I will do the missed information that I was going to do, because, again, as with the reason behind us deciding not to do Mystery Hour today, it would feel a tiny bit frivolous in the context of the seriousness that is unfolding around us. But I would do two things. I'd remind you that the LBC app provides you with all manner of access to information, not just audio, not just radio, podcast and programming, but also now high quality written journalism and a constant live stream. And that is pretty much it from me for today. If you did miss any of today's show, you can listen back on, catch up on the LBC app, and of course also on the Global Player, where you can stay up to date on all the top stories and opinion. You can put your news categories into the order that you want, as well as pause and rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcasts. So do download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4. But now, in for Sheila Fogarty, it's time for Asma Mir.
James O'Brien on LBC.